Chapter 515, Harvests for Everyone. Frankly speaking, although Alger had predicted that Miss Justice wouldn't bargain, and the fact that the mystical item was indeed worth about £5,500, he still felt a strong sense of discomfort over such actions. It felt like after all the hard work he had put in to make a killing, the money he earned wasn't even more than her pocket money. £675 split from the world, and the artisan's fee is only £600. I'll earn a net profit of £400. I've made a total of £1,075 in this transaction, but the world isn't a simple figure. He has a great deal of beyonder characteristics and potion formulas, and he's involved in a great number of events. He's in the know of relatively important information. It's not worth it to get into a conflict with him over a few £100. Otherwise, I could have pushed the price of his beyonder characteristic to below £4,000. The hanged man thought wistfully. As the fool rejoiced at the prospect of receiving £3,825, Derek looked at the lady across him and earnestly said, "Miss Magician, your spirit-eater's stomach pouch is ready." "Excellent." Furs heaved a sigh of relief. "I'll pay £300 in cash to Mr. Hanged Man." Upon hearing this, Alger's spirit was also lifted. He hurriedly requested the fool sitting at the end of the long bronze table for permission to conjure the potion formula. A few seconds later, he wrote the Solar High Priest formula onto the yellowish-brown goatskin parchment in front of him. Sequence 7. Solar High Priest. Main ingredients: 1 comb of a dawn rooster, 1 fruit of a radiant spirit-packed tree. Supplementary ingredients: 100 milliliters of a dawn rooster, 10 drops of sun essential oil, 8 grams of fingered citron powder, and 5 grams of solidified lava. Although Klein didn't deliberately pry into this potion formula, the content which was conjured thanks to him was still reflected in his mind. As long as he was willing to use dream divination to recall, he would immediately get the corresponding knowledge. He couldn't help but exclaim, "Indeed, being a platform is most profitable." Derek received the piece of parchment expectantly, glancing at it with relief and excitement. Then, he conjured the list of monsters which were found in the area surrounding the City of Silver, letting the hanged man pick out the beyonder ingredients that would be used to level the difference in prices. Alger calmly and carefully checked the list, gaining a precise understanding of the situation around the City of Silver. After that, he selected 3 ingredients that he knew had buyers and prices. "After that, I'll be able to sell them within 2 days, earning me about £1,000. Counting the £300 from Miss Magician and the previous £1,075, I'll finally have enough money for the dragon-eyed sea condor's eyeballs." Feeling exhausted, Alger turned his head to the side and said to Furs, "Miss Magician, you can prepare the transaction for the dragon-eyed sea condor eyeballs." The hanged man had less than £20 on him at present, and even the artisan fees he had paid in advance was borrowed thanks to his wide network of contacts. However, by the end of the transaction, his cash assets would reach £2,375, sufficient enough to cover the £2,000 required for the main ingredient. Furs thought of the loss she had suffered last week at the hands of Mr. Hanged Man and responded, feeling slight grievance, "All right." For her, how much this deal would eventually earn her would depend on her teacher, Dorian Gray. She wouldn't earn anything extra beyond what he was willing to share with her. At the end of the transaction segment, Klein manipulated the world to seek to purchase the remnant spirituality of ancient wraiths and a pair of eyes from a 6-winged gargoyle. As for the sale or process of making the Murloc bladder into a mystical item, he temporarily didn't intend to do it through the Tarot Club. He wished to use it as a catalyst to expand his social connections and resource channels at sea. After today's tarot gathering, Miss Justice will finish gathering her psychiatrist potion's ingredients, and the same is true for Miss Magician's Trickmaster potion. Now that little son has the formula, he can finally work towards Sequence 7. He's one step closer to providing me with a way to remove the mental corruption inside a beyonder characteristic. Mr. Hanged Man is about to receive one of the main ingredients of Wind Blessed, so there's only one last obstacle in his way before reaching Sequence 6. Only Emlyn hasn't yet made up his mind or found a solution. There's no hope of him advancing in the near future. Klein looked around and said with a chuckle, "Continue your free exchange." Audrey was about to say something out of habit, but when she thought about it carefully, she felt that there was no news to share this week. Apart from the numerous balls I've attended and the 2 psychology classes, there are only matters regarding my return to East Chester County that can be talked about, but there's no need to. She pursed her lips and remained silent. Furs, who was still in her languid state from the New Year's holidays, continued having a blank mind. She commented, feeling rather guiltily, "Backlund is still under the same kind of high pressure as before. Don't take any risks unless you're an official beyonder." "Is that so?" Emlyn, who had been behaving well during this time, frowned doubtfully. A vampire like him who led a routine lifestyle couldn't experience the pain of having all the beyonder gatherings stopped. The hanged man nodded and thought for a while. Then, he said to the son, "Don't be careless. Before holding a sacrificial ritual, it's best if you confirm that the chief who led the exploratory team isn't in the City of Silver, or if he's busy with other matters." "Mr. Hanged Man, do you mean that the chief could have noticed the repeated cycle of fate?" Derek asked in astonishment. The Hanged Man replied solemnly, "That possibility can't be ruled out. However, I can't be sure since I don't know enough about your City of Silver." Having said that, he hid his smile and presented a serious expression. Derek said with chagrin, "There are many things I'm not sure of either." Alger sighed inwardly, eliminating his disappointed emotions. "In short, caution and carefulness will allow you to live longer." "Thank you for your reminder," the son said sincerely. The Hanged Man withdrew his gaze and said with a smile, "Recently, the sea has been relatively calm." "No, that's just what you think." Klein silently retorted, manipulating the world to speak with a hoarse voice, "I just happened to hear about something at sea." Without waiting for the Hanged Man to ask, he looked at Justice and the magician. "Ladies, can you buy me a radio transceiver?" "I can give it a try." Furs agreed without paying too much attention. As she was about to leave Backlund, Audrey could only say sorry. After negotiating this deal, the world cleared his throat and said, "That matter has something to do with the Church of Storms." "Something to do with the church? Why didn't I receive any notice? Is it not required for them to pass it down to people at my level?" The Hanged Man frowned and waited patiently for the world to speak in detail. The world originally wanted to sweep the Hanged Man with a teasing look, but due to the difficulty of those sequence of actions, he could only regretfully give up. With a heavy and hoarse laugh, he said, "An old custom in Bancy Harbor was revived. Some of the inhabitants became heretics, and even a bishop of the Church of Storms was corrupted. I heard that the matter has been resolved, but quite a few people died." Bancy Harbor. Alger recalled the situation of the area and explained to Miss Justice and the others who remained confused, "There's a custom of living sacrifices there, and the target is an evil spirit called the God of Weather. Overseas, in the southern continent, there are quite a number of such evil spirits. On the surface, it seems like they've been cleared away, but in reality, they continue living in a strange state. Many people have suddenly died in those places. Heh, it isn't necessarily because of an illness. If you guys have similar travel or adventure plans, don't be careless." Alger tried to describe what had happened in Bancy Harbor as an accident, one that was within the realm of understanding. Suddenly, he heard rather deep laughter. This laughter came from the end of the mottled long table. "Mr. Fool." The Hanged Man suddenly turned his head. "Mr. Fool. Bancy Harbor isn't as simple as it seems." Audrey immediately looked at Mr. Fool, who was sitting upright on his high-backed chair. Noticing looks of puzzlement, curiosity, or excitement, Klein laughed leisurely with a hint of reminiscence in his voice. "This reminds me of a king of angels." "A king of angels?" "The matter of Bancy Harbor involves a king of angels." Audrey's eyes widened in anticipation of what Mr. Fool was to say next. "A king of angels." Furs took a deep breath, her expression somewhat bitter. Why is it that all we talk about at the Tarot Club is the descent of the true creator, the awakening of the primordial demoness, and the reappearance of a king of angels? I'm only a sequence 9. She wanted to look up at the sky and sigh. Emlyn, on the other hand, felt a baffling sense of excitement, having found another reason for why his ancestor had gotten him to pray to the Fool. As expected, this is a gathering of messiahs in preparation for the apocalypse. We are the chosen ones who will gradually face evil existences such as the King of Angels, the primordial demoness, the true creator, and so on. Emlyn had an impulse to immediately agree to the deal proposed by the hanged man, but the fact that he had no money had ruthlessly crushed the fantasy in his mind. Which King of Angels will it be? In a rare occasion, Derek joined in with the conversation with Miss Justice and the rest. A King of Angels. What secret is Bancy Harbor hiding? Alger was waiting for the answer with rapt attention. Seeing that Mr. Fool didn't plan on continuing, Audrey couldn't help but ask, "Honorable Mr. Fool, which King of Angels is it?" Klein leaned back in his chair, chuckled and said, "Medici, who established the Rose Redemption. His descendants live in Binzi." Rose Redemption. The King of Angels related to the true creator? Audrey didn't expect that the matter would be multi-layered, with each layer more serious than the last. She subconsciously asked, "Binzi?" "That's the old name of Bancy," Alger replied in a low voice as he clenched his hands. He could no longer imagine the truth behind this matter. He only knew that the unforeseen event in Bancy Harbor might not be over yet. The danger that could devour people remained lurking in the shadows. He didn't know much about the phrase Rose Redemption, only knowing that it had something to do with the temple of the true creator and the angel of fate, Ouroboros, but was unable to confirm exactly what it represented. In short, the level of this matter is beyond my imagination. Alger looked at the end of the long, mottled table, and suddenly the thought flashed through his mind that Mr. Fool really did know the 8 kings of angels and that he knew many secrets. At that moment, he thought of something. Just last week at the gathering, Miss Justice had inquired about the other kings of angels, and Mr. Fool's answer was that we will come into contact with them in the future. And just a week later, we really have come into contact with a new king of angels. Mr. Fool had foreseen this. Alger's pupils shrank as he lowered his gaze in fear. Chapter 5:16, The Hanged Man's Guess. Amidst his shock, another doubt surfaced in Alger's mind. If Mr. Fool had foreseen this, why did he mention that Bancy Harbor's matter is related to Rose Redemption and the King of Angels, Medici? Did he tell us on purpose? He hopes to spread this matter through us. The target is the King of Angels, Medici. No, it's more likely to be the true creator. Mr. Fool has repeatedly thwarted the plans of the true creator before, so it should be no exception this time. The term Rose Redemption appeared in the abandoned temple of the true creator, and it's established by the King of Angels, Medici, and Ouroboros. Clearly, they share a deep connection with the true creator. Bancy Harbor only has our Church of Storms, so the person Mr. Fool is really informing is actually me? Alger vaguely understood something. Then, he became acutely aware of another problem. The last time the world mentioned that something major was about to happen in Backlund, it was immediately confirmed by Mr. Fool, and it later involved the awakening of the primordial demoness and the descent of the true creator. This time, the abnormality at Bancy Harbor also received a response from Mr. Fool. He revealed the secret hidden in ancient Binzi and has brought the Rose Redemption and the King of Angels to the forefront of all the members of the Tarot Club. Isn't this too coincidental? Yes, news provided by the world previously had to do with Backlund, and this is the first time it involves the sea. Furthermore, Mr. Fool had mentioned last week that his adorer has been forced to leave Backlund because of the Great Smog. They match perfectly. So, the world is actually Mr. Fool's adorer? No, he should be a representative among all his adorers in the Tarot Club. He's to do things that Mr. Fool finds inconvenient. Of course, through this gathering, the adorer will also trade goods and knowledge in order to advance himself. This is also considered a form of Mr. Fool's nurturing of him. On careful thought, this theory is probably correct. At least, the world has never collected Roselle's diary in exchange for knowledge or intelligence from Mr. Fool. As his adorer, it's his duty, so he has probably submitted them in private. From this conclusion, some deliberate questions or contradictions on the world's part are meant to conceal his identity as an adorer. This is consistent with his experienced, skilled, and cunning character. In addition to the hidden attempt to awaken as he slowly lifts the seal, Mr. Fool holds the tarot gathering to also use us to interfere in certain events. This is evident from the composition of the members: a high noble, a beyonder at the bishop level of the church, a survivor of the forsaken land of the gods, a student of the Abraham family, an adult vampire. Each of us represents a faction or a particular circle or resource channel. Many thoughts flashed through Alger's mind. Not only was he not repressed by his own guesses, but he was also excited. To him, Mr. Fool's unknown purpose was the most frightening thing. Having an initial understanding of what he wanted to do allowed him to effectively avoid any risks and improve himself by doing so. As long as the Fool wants to use us to do things, he'll definitely give us some benefits. This is exactly what I was hoping for. Otherwise, I don't know when I'll be able to see the hope of becoming a demigod. Ha, the world, you definitely didn't expect that I would see through your disguise. Alger's fear subsided, and he began to think about how to use the information about Bansi Harbor. He couldn't report the matter just like that, as it would arouse suspicion, and he had to patiently wait for an opportunity to let the higher-ups appreciate him and reward him, without ending up being monitored. Audrey could tell that Mr. Hanged Man was undergoing a mental exercise, but she didn't expect him to come up with so many guesses in such a short period of time. And from the words of Mr. Fool, she was delighted to learn that Rose Redemption was a secret organization established by a number of kings of angels, which was also related to the true creator. At the same time, she vaguely sensed the strangeness of the world. She realized that this member of the organization, who was the most difficult to read, was always involved in important matters and could always obtain important information. Furthermore, he constantly produced formulas, ingredients, and beyonder characteristics, as if he could successfully hunt down a beyonder within 1 to 2 weeks. He left Backlund and went to sea. Or was it a rumor he heard in Backlund? Should I tell this information to the church? Well, Mr. Hanged Man has a close relationship with the Church of Storms, so it's better for him to do it, and there wouldn't be any problems. Audrey suppressed the thought of probing and only curiously asked, "Honorable Mr. Fool, what's the title of the King of Angels, Medici? Or should I say, what is his pathway?" Klein leaned back into his chair and said with a deep chuckle, "Red Priest." Red Priest? Which pathway is that? It sounds very similar to the Dark Emperor. Could it be that it's another Sequence Zero title? Audrey thought with excitement and joy. Red Priest. Derek silently muttered the words, realizing that there was no corresponding record in the City of Silver's history. Perhaps I haven't read enough, having only received a general education, he thought regretfully. Furs and Emlyn listened as if they were listening to a story and were equally interested in similar information. The only problem is that I can't brag about it or write it into my novels. Furs felt a pang of regret. Mr. Hanged Man will likely report it to his superiors. Let's hope he doesn't delay it for too long. With his shrewdness, he may have already figured out some of the problems regarding the world and has grasped the relationship between him and the Fool. Fortunately, I've deliberately set up the world to be Sherlock Moriarty since a long time ago, giving him the identity of an adorer. Mr. Hanged Man can at best detect it up to this point, unable to imagine that the world is actually a dummy. Klein raised his hand to his chin, smiled, and said, "Continue." Seeing that Mr. Fool was no longer talking about the subject, Emlyn, who had freed himself from his emotions as a messiah, began to face the difficult problems of reality. That was his lack of money. Regardless, he had never considered selling off his dolls. He only told himself that he needed to be frugal in the future. Only after half a year or even a year could he get himself a new doll, or he could buy a new set of clothes for the dolls he already had. In addition, the only way he could think of making money was to sell some potions that had a miraculous effect, but that could easily bring hidden danger to his clansmen in Backland. This is an arrangement by the ancestor. Logically speaking, Lord Nibs should provide me help, but Mr. Fool wishes for me to keep it a secret, to be the Messiah in the shadows who's burdened with responsibility. I'm not to reveal it on my own accord. After thinking for a few seconds, Emlyn pumped himself up, cleared his throat, and said, "Everyone, I have a question. Here's the matter. Suppose there's a powerhouse who has arranged for you to investigate something. Although you have successfully obtained the information, you are unable to report it to the person due to certain reasons. Then, how can you continue to get support from this powerhouse?" Having said this, Emlyn suddenly felt that this act was somewhat shameful. This makes me appear like a traitor and a spy. No, I'm doing this for the sake of the Sanguine's continuation. For this, I have to give up my reputation and bear the burden of being misunderstood. When this is over, and when the truth is revealed, they'll be moved by me. Emlyn quickly eased his prior feelings. At this moment, Audrey, Furs, and Derek cast their eyes towards Alger. In their eyes, Mr. Hanged Man was the most experienced and the best teacher in this field. Klein also thought so too. Alger glanced at the moon and chuckled. "It's simple, but you have to take some risks." Emlyn subconsciously denied, "It's not me." The Hanged Man replied with a chuckle, "Let's assume that it's you." He continued his description. "You will slowly display a certain level of abnormalities in your daily life, allowing that powerhouse to see that you have a problem. He will have two choices. One is to interrogate you directly, but it will be very easy to end up losing a lead for clues. The second is to inadvertently provide you with help so that you can investigate more thoroughly and then send people to monitor you. I think the second possibility is the most likely. The risk you have to take is how to not reveal the information you want to hide while under surveillance. That works? In fact, I won't be exposed either. Every tarot gathering, I'll be resting in the Harvest Church, looking normal on the outside. As for the sacrifice of items and the receiving of bestowments, they're things that can be shown to Lord Nibs and the others. It will allow them to guess that I have formed some sort of connection with Mr. Fool, but they can't imagine that I've already joined a secret gathering. Very well, while I'm studying history, I'll take the initiative to ask Baron Waymandy about the City of Silver." Emlyn's eyes lit up as he had an idea. He then thought of something and turned to the Hanged Man. "Last week, didn't you ask about a way to make everyone on board a ship sleep at the same time? It's very simple. I can provide you with a magical anesthetic gas that can effectively spread without any irritating smells. Even on the deck, one will fall unconscious once they catch a whiff of it. Of course, it's best if you choose a windless night, and that the targets are unable to sense danger, and their physiques cannot be too strong. Those Beyonders that are well known for their physiques in Sequence 9 are the limit. It can cause deep slumber that lasts for more than 3 hours. The effects will constantly decline after that. £100 a can, and an extra £30 for me." The Hanged Man thought about the situation of the sailors on the ghost ship and didn't haggle. Okay. He wanted to erect a certain image in front of the moon, to prepare for the big transaction that would follow. He had thought of using a slumber charm, but that would require him to chant the incantation. It would make the sailors notice that something was wrong and suspect something afterward. At the end of the exchange, Klein tapped the surface of the long, mottled table with his finger, and he said with a leisurely smile, "I can foresee that everyone will present a new appearance of themselves next week. Let us end today's gathering here. Thank you for your blessings." Audrey was the first to stand up. She took her leave, expressing her gratitude. With Mr. Fool saying those words, she felt more confident in consuming the psychiatrist potion. As the magician and the others repeated the same words, one figure after another disappeared from the palace. The area above the grey fog returned to its eternal silence. Chapter 5:17, City of Generosity, Backlund, Cherwood Borough. As the crimson glow faded from her eyes, Furs saw the familiar desk and open notebook which she used to jot down her inspirations. To her, this experience was no longer anything new, but it still evoked reverence from the bottom of her heart. This was a power that didn't belong to humans, something that even demigods were incapable of. I'll receive the stomach pouch of a spirit eater in 2 days. My apprentice potion has already been digested. Finally, I'll become a trick master. I wonder what beyonder powers I'll receive. By advancing by my own abilities, teacher will definitely place greater importance on me. Apart from potion formulas in the future, perhaps I might be provided with some beyonder ingredients. How I look forward to that very much. I don't even know the corresponding names of sequence 6 and 5. I only know that sequence 7 is astrologer. After I become a trick master, I'll immediately write to teacher. Furs felt like she was one step closer to ridding herself from the curse of the full moon. At this moment, she heard the sound of hurried footsteps approaching. Finally, it turned into the slam of the door. Zio is out again. She's so busy. Furs sighed silently. If not for the £400 debt that she owes Viscount Glaint, we would probably be vacationing at Desi Bay now. After a long period of hard work, and thanks to the enhancement of her strength, certain tasks that were previously impossible for her to complete have become simple. Moreover, from time to time, Zio would receive small tasks that pay well from the Golden Masked Man. Zio has already raised her savings from £110 to £320, leaving her with only £80 left to pay off her debt. In fact, I could spot her £80, but unfortunately, although she isn't tall, she still has a lot of pride in her. Furs withdrew her thoughts and thought about the matter Mr. World had entrusted her. As a doctor and a writer, she didn't know much about radios or anything about the entire field of machinery. She didn't usually pay attention to such information when reading the newspapers, so she didn't know where she could buy the kind of transceiver the world wanted. A department store? It probably doesn't sell one. Ah, right, Avil writes science fiction, so he should know a lot about such matters. Furs quickly found the right person to consult. However, she immediately had a new problem. Was she to visit him directly, or was she to write him a letter of inquiry? Glancing at the chair covered in a thick, soft blanket, and smelling the fragrance of coffee and tobacco emanating the room, she felt a warmth slowly creeping through her body. Bit by bit, her motivation to leave the house crumbled. I'm not familiar with him, so I shouldn't rashly pay him a visit. She sat down with a grunt and unfolded a piece of paper. In the Berg household in the City of Silver. Derek opened his eyes and woke up from feigning sleep. According to his original plan, he would have immediately held a sacrificial ritual to send out the stomach pouch of the spirit eater. However, the words of the hanged man reminded him to be more cautious and make more observations. I'll gather the ingredients Mr. Hanged Man require first, and then I'll do the sacrificial ritual all at once. Derek remained silent for a few seconds, then he attached his axe of hurricane to his body and headed for the steeple. He first checked the items available for exchanging using merit points, but he wasn't in a hurry to complete the transaction. He planned to go to the underground market to take a look once the lightning in the sky subsided. Derek went up to the 3rd floor and headed straight for the library section that dealt with mythology and ancient classics, hungering for valuable information he hadn't learned yet. Suddenly, he saw a hard and yellowed book with a cover, Giant King's Court, Book of Blackrock, hand-copied edition. It's a record passed down from the Giant King's Court. I wonder if there's anything related to the Kings of Angels. Derek reached for the book, pulled it out, and saw that it was bound in a brown monster hide. At that moment, on the upper level of the library, Colin Iliad was wearing a flaxen-colored linen shirt and a brown coat and standing there quietly, looking down. His unkempt grizzled hair flailed in the breeze from the window, and his pale blue eyes were deep and reserved. Wednesday, January 12th. 5:40 p.m. The sky was dark and cloudy, with deep blue waves undulating across the sea. The white agate bobbed up and down in this storm, like a toy in the palm of a giant. This is the sea. No matter how powerful one is, one will appear insignificant in front of it. Danitz stood by the window and enjoyed the scenery outside. Fortunately, we're almost at the City of Generosity. From the moment they left Bansi Harbor, the White Agate's journey had been smooth sailing. With the help of the wind, it reached a stable speed of 15 knots. Hence, even though they arrived at Tiana port a little later than scheduled, they completed the entire journey half a day earlier. That is to say, the White Agate, which was scheduled to arrive at the City of Generosity on the morning of the 13th, arrived on the evening of the 12th. Hearing Danitz's reflections, Klein just glanced up at him, then looked away and continued his contemplation. The more he played the part of Gehrman Sparrow, and the more he had to force himself to behave in accordance with his persona, the more deeply he realized what kind of person he was. When faced with different situations, he realized that the choices he really wanted to make were different from Gehrman Sparrow's. For example, he would have responded to Danitz by idly chatting with him about the weather at sea and the disasters caused by those terrible storms, but Gehrman Sparrow wouldn't. He had to be cold and reserved. The more there are such differences, the more I recognize myself. Klein sighed inwardly. This was something he hadn't experienced when he moved about with his identity as the private detective, Sherlock Moriarty. Back then, he didn't have to disguise his personality and had just been himself. I feel like I've digested my potion a little. However, Gehrman Sparrow has traits that are similar to myself. At the very least, when choosing to disembark and entering Bansi Harbor to save the others, I overlapped with this identity of mine, and there was no difference. Of course, it could also be said that I was adding a certain kind of persona into the mix. Beneath Gehrman Sparrow's gentleness and madness, he has a kind, brave, and compassionate heart that values relationships. Haha, I can't boast about myself. If I had known earlier that Bansi was Binzi, I would have most likely been terrified. Not necessarily. At the very least, the danger which was divined was within an acceptable range. Klein thought, summing things up as he engaged in self-deprecation. This made him more aware of a problem. Although playing the role of a purely fictional person could help him digest the potion, he needed to replace an existing identity to speed up and improve his progress. He needed to gain the affirmation of people from the other person's interpersonal relationships, feel the corresponding emotions of joy, anger, sadness, and immersing himself in them, but not getting obsessed. Become anyone, but ultimately become yourself in the end? And get feedback from the people involved. Klein looked at the pale yellow carpet, his mind racing. Seeing Gehrman Sparrow without a response, Danitz spread his hands helplessly, feeling bored out of his mind. This crazy guy is good in every way other than making me do what servants do. There's only one thing, he doesn't like to talk. There's a communication barrier with him. If this goes on, I'll definitely go crazy. Fortunately, I'm finally at Byam. I can finally be free. Danitz felt that he would sooner or later develop a habit of talking to himself when faced with a similar silence. After a while he saw Gehrman Sparrow look up, smile, and say, "You can tell me about the pirate point of contacts in Byam." Dogs hit. It's better if you don't say anything. Danitz's expression twisted. Whoosh. At 6:15 p.m., just before the storm arrived, the White Agate docked smoothly and arrived at the capital of the Rørsted Archipelago, Byam, the City of Generosity. It was also known as the Spice Archipelago, and it was home to a variety of exotic spices, with the plantations of these produce being mainstays of the economy. The Blue Mountain Island, where Byam was located, occupied more than half of the archipelago, which was mostly covered in forest. It had gold, silver, copper, coal, iron, and other minerals, as well as a plentiful variety of fruits due to the particularly fertile land. For these reasons, the first batch of colonists named the seaside city they built the City of Generosity. They believed it was a land of treasure promised by the gods, where it flowed with milk and honey. Klein picked up his suitcase which Danitz packed, and he left room 312, entering the corridor that led to the deck. Without any surprises, he met Donna's family, Cleves, and others. The two siblings were still a little afraid of Klein after the fright he gave them. They hid behind their parents and bodyguards and didn't dare to speak, appearing like deflated balloons. Klein nodded slightly as a form of greeting. At this moment, Ertie Branch hesitated for a second and then took a half-step forward. "Mr. Sparrow, will you be staying in Byam? If I wish to hire, request for your help, how can I contact you?" He's indeed a businessman with a spirit of adventure. Even if he's afraid, he still wishes to befriend someone with beyonder powers. Klein thought for a moment. "What newspapers are in circulation over here?" "The Sonia Morning Post and the News Report are popular in the archipelago," Ertie said without any thought. "Put an advertisement in the Sonia Morning Post for 3 days in a row asking to buy Demir's special cured meat, and leave an address. I'll go look for you, and if I don't show up 3 days later, it means I'm at sea again." Klein was careful to give a one-way method of contact. "All right." Ertie exhaled and smiled. Clevis and the others expressed their gratitude once again and left the cabin in an orderly manner. Noticing the gangway in sight, Donna suddenly slowed her pace and stepped back next to Klein, raised her face, and bit her lip. "Uncle Sparrow, since that kind of power definitely brings about threats and madness, why did you choose to have it?" She had thought about this question for a long time before finally mustering the courage to ask. Klein was startled, and he instinctively formed a smile. "For my dream." Then he lowered his voice and said 2 words, and protect. "Protect." Donna mumbled the word in a slightly lost voice, picked up her pace, and caught up with her parents. After watching the Branch family leave the White Agate, Klein retracted his gaze and said to Danitz, "You're free." "Ah." For a moment, Danitz wasn't used to it. Chapter 5:18, On the brink of death. Without another word or care for Danitz, Klein pressed his top hat and carried his suitcase down the gangway. "Are you really going to let me go?" Blazing Danitz stood on the deck, his face filled with suspicion. Although he had expected such an outcome, with Gehrman Sparrow directly letting him go while in Demir Harbor, making him capable of imagining today's scene, he still couldn't believe it. He felt that everything that befell him came too simply and easily. "Regardless, I'm worth 3,000 pounds. "No, this is the bounty offered only by loan." Isn't this madman, Gehrman Sparrow, an adventurer? How can he let go of a huge amount of wealth in front of him? It's incomprehensible. It's true that normal people can't understand the mindset of lunatics. Danitz gradually snapped back to his senses. With his luggage in hand, he carefully descended the gangway and stepped onto the concrete ground of the dock. He straightened his back, lifted his head, and gave Gehrman Sparrow's back a glance. He realized that he really wasn't turning back and was following the path straight for Coastal Street. Danitz didn't dare delay a second longer. He immediately turned around and left through another path, occasionally changing directions and using obstacles to look back, in order to ensure that he wasn't followed. Soon, he arrived at a row of houses near the warehouse at the dock. Gehrman Sparrow really didn't use me as bait. After triple-checking, Danitz finally relaxed completely. At this moment, he finally felt like he was liberated. A dignified bosun of a pirate admiral like him no longer had to be bullied and be ordered around like a servant. "I can already foresee that tomorrow will be incomparably beautiful. There will be a group of people vying to flatter me, wanting to become my servants." Danitz knocked happily on the door, 3 long and 3 short, rhythmically. Gehrman Sparrow asked me to give him the pirate point of contacts in Byam. I obviously only told him the ones that don't have a good relationship with us. There's no way he could guess that our Golden Dream point of contact is right at the dock. Danitz picked at his nose and breathed in the fresh sea breeze before a looming rain. Byam was a pivotal location of the Lone Kingdom's Sonia Sea colonies. It was one of the largest cities in the region. There were many powerful official beyonders, and no matter how rampant the pirates were, they didn't dare to openly show their faces here. Most of the time, they had to rely on the local gangs or people with backgrounds to handle the loot and purchase any necessities. Of course, this didn't mean that they wouldn't come to buy 'em. The Red Theater here was the most famous brothel in the surrounding seas, and countless pirates came to patronize this famous place. Even if one or two of their peers were caught every once in a while, it didn't stop them from rushing over. In addition to the spice trade, the brothel industry was another major pillar of the Rorstad archipelago. Apart from the Red Theater, there were many big or small brothels, out in the open or hidden all over the place. They fully satisfied the desires of the seamen with ample energy. As for the female pirates, they didn't have to worry about this problem. As long as they were willing, they could always be satisfied. After all, there was more demand than supply. At sea, where faith in the Lord of Storms was mainstream, there had always been few females. Similarly, the underground trade related to beyonder ingredients and mysticism was quite frequent here, and there were many circles. Those smaller ports are still better. We don't have to be afraid of being discovered at all, and we can just openly sit in a bar, engage in disputes with adventurers, and even fight them. As long as we don't cause any trouble or cause any deaths, the local official beyonders will turn a blind eye. With their strength, they typically have to take on tremendous risks if they wish to interfere. Danitz thought mockingly. At that moment, he heard footsteps and saw the door creak open. A familiar face entered his sight. "Old man, did you not drink today?" Danitz smiled and greeted. Standing at the door was one of the Golden Dream's contacts in the Rorstad archipelago, Old Rin. Old Rin coughed twice and made way. Danitz stepped into the dim room, his nose twitching suddenly. He caught a whiff of Lanti-proof. No, Old Rin likes to drink locally produced Byam Black Rand. As this thought flashed through his mind, Danitz was terrified. Immediately following that, he saw a man with his back to him rise to his feet. He was tall, dark, and muscular, and his hair was curled like marbles. Steel, Mavedi. Danitz's pupils contracted sharply. This was the second mate of the Admiral of Blood, a great pirate with a bounty of 6,000 pounds. Waves of the sea breeze blew, swaying the thin, sharp leaves of the tree in a precarious manner. Klein was walking along Coastal Street at an adequate speed. In contrast, the people around him were hurrying and walking quickly. His spiritual intuition told him that it would take some time before the storm would arrive, and that he had plenty of time to find a hotel. Whoosh! The sound of the wind grew louder and louder. Tree branches fell to the ground, and there weren't many people left on the street. Klein was about to turn into another alley when he heard the sound of hasty but disorderly running. Tap! 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 Danitz was running with all his might, but the scene in front of him began to rock. He felt an abnormal pain from his wound as he felt his vitality rapidly sapping away. His spirit body had partially left his body, approaching the legendary underworld. As for the surrounding sounds, he could only vaguely hear them, and everything in his line of sight looked like it wasn't real. If it wasn't for having Shadow Cloak, the ambush would have killed him. But even so, he was still severely injured and could die on the streets at any moment. He was forced to run towards Coastal Street because of his will to warn the captain that their point of contact had been compromised by the Admiral of Blood, as well as the glimmer of hope brought by that crazy but powerful figure. If it's him, then he would definitely be able to escape from the hands of Steel, Mavedi's henchmen. Danitz began to stagger, and his body gradually grew cold. Just as he was about to collapse, he saw Gehrman Sparrow standing by a street corner. His refined face that hid madness appeared so genial at that moment. Plop! Danitz fell on his back, his hands hanging limply over his chest, revealing a hideous, exaggerated wound that was inflicted to his organs. Tell Captain that Old Rin has been discovered. Steel Mavedi did it for that treasure. Danitz saw Gehrman Sparrow kneel to his side as he hurriedly spoke. Klein recalled the bounty offered for Steel Mavedi and asked in return, Admiral of Blood? Yes, tell Captain. Tell Captain. Danitz gasped as he said. After saying all that, he revealed a mournful smile. Don't worry about me. I'm about to die soon. Tell the captain that all the money I've saved up has been turned into real estate. Units 12 to 16 on Byam's Amiris Avenue. The title deeds are hidden in the wall of Unit 13's basement. H. Help me sell them. T. Take the money to South Intis's Elima town. G. Give the money to my parents. S. Say that I've really made a fortune. Danitz paused, then he said with great difficulty, S. Say that I've become an outstanding adventurer. Also. Help me. S. Say I'm sorry. His eyes suddenly became moist, as if he was recalling that rebellious youth from back then. I'm sorry, old man, mother. I'm unable to return home. Danitz's vision darkened, and he felt that his life was coming to an end. It was at this moment that he saw Gehrman Sparrow reach out and press his hand to his wound and then swipe it. Danitz's sorrow came to a sudden halt as he felt the already numb pain in his chest and abdomen suddenly disappear as his left hand seemed to suffer a fracture. He looked at Klein blankly, and Klein looked back at him quietly. None of them spoke for 2 seconds. Finally, he looked down in astonishment and discovered that his lethal wound had strangely healed. His left arm was badly mutilated, and even his bones protruded out. I am fine now. Danitz blinked, still immersed in the sadness and frustration of his brush with death. Why didn't you treat me first? He asked blankly. Klein looked back at the empty area on the other side of Coastal Street and said in a calm tone, waiting for you to finish. That's basic courtesy. Courtesy, you son of a bitch. I was really saying my last words. With a sudden jerk of his back, Danitz rolled to his feet. He warily looked towards the dock, where a thick cloud of smoke was rising. It was none other than the result of the battle he had just been engaged in. Because the house was set on fire by me, Steele Mavady was afraid that it would catch the attention of the official beyonders. As he was confused by that shadow, he didn't chase after me. Danitz instantly understood the sequence of events. Let's find a place to stay first. Klein spread his hands and caught a drop of rain. Not knowing whether or not he had completely escaped danger, Danitz immediately nodded. Okay. I can tell that this madman, Gehrman Sparrow, isn't afraid of Steele Mavady at all. He's not even afraid of Admiral of Blood. At such times, I especially admire his craziness. Damn, I exposed my wealth to him. Danitz had just exhaled when his body froze. Klein walked silently ahead with his suitcase and cane with only one thought echoing in his head. Godmit, a pirate is richer than I am. Empress Burrow. Audrey, who was about to leave Backlund, hid in her chemistry laboratory and concocted the psychiatrist potion with the ingredients she received from Mr. Vampire, the fruit of the Tree of Elders, the blood of a mirror dragon, and the other ingredients she had collected previously. This time, she didn't get Susie to guard the door. Instead, she was to sit inside and observe the whole process from the sidelines. Earl Hall had already instructed everyone to not approach the young lady during her experiments, but they had to pay attention to any unusual changes. Phew. Audrey let out a small sigh of relief, pouring the completed potion into a prepared glass bottle. The slightly golden liquid rippled like a deformed, gigantic pupil. Its gaze seemed to shine right into the eyes of anyone's heart. Susie, did you remember the process? You are a mature, no. You are a mature beyonder. In the future, you'll have to learn how to concoct your own potion. No, it's not that I'm not helping you, it's just that I'm pointing out a possibility. Sometimes, I might not be by your side, and you just happen to need a potion bottle, Audrey said happily to the huge golden retriever. Susie was so confused by what she was taught, and she could only open her mouth to reply with a single word, woof. Converging her emotions, Audrey raised her head and downed the psychiatrist potion bottle. Chapter 519, naming the golden liquid was cool and refreshing, making Audrey feel as if she was enjoying a delicious ice cream. She then took a sip of champagne. Tiny bubbles of air continuously rose, silently bursting as they brought a tingling sensation with them. Suddenly, her sense of hearing reached out, and she could hear the conversation of the two maids at the end of the corridor as they lamented at how they had no chance of going to the Hall family's castle and manor in Eastchester County. At this moment, Audrey felt as if she had dissolved into an illusory gas and was rapidly expanding. It filled the entire room, overlapping with a sea formed from everyone's sea of consciousness. Her vision also changed. Everything she saw was abnormally smooth, turning into a mirror that reflected her current appearance. Possessing a beauty described by pure, exquisite, grand, and witty, golden scales that were slowly growing out of her exposed skin, her emerald green irises contracted and were dyed in a faint golden color, as if they had turned vertical. Audrey suddenly felt fear from the bottom of her heart when she saw herself like this. She didn't want or wish to become an inhuman monster. With a hum, her mind began to turn into a blur, as if something was slowly and painfully drilling out from the surface of her body. Just then, she heard the gentle voice of her huge golden retriever, Susie. "Don't be afraid, calm down. Don't be afraid, calm down." Audrey recovered her thoughts and tried to get herself into a spectator state. Her undulating emotions quickly calmed down, and her spirit seemed to leave her body. She then looked down at herself like a spectator. Audrey saw the golden scales on the surface of her body visibly recede and her emerald-like eyes return to normal. It didn't take her long to regain control of her body and understand what beyonder powers were available to a psychiatrist and how they were used. It was so dangerous just now. Audrey raised her hand in fear. Her skin was fair and delicate, completely unlike the abnormal condition she had been in a moment ago. After this incident, she truly understood how terrifying the danger of losing control which Mr. Fool would occasionally bring up was. She gained a deep understanding of how difficult it was to go down the beyonder path. Even with the acting method, it was impossible to completely remove the latent risks. At one gathering, Mr. World said that beyonders are a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against threats and madness. Previously, I could only understand it literally. Now, I can finally feel the weight behind this sentence. Audrey, don't be discouraged, don't be afraid. Father, mother, and brother are still waiting for your protection. With this experience, you won't be frightened by yourself in the future or so easily lose control. You can do it. Audrey clenched her fists and encouraged herself. She calmed down for 2 seconds, walked up to Susie, squatted down, and hugged the golden retriever. As she combed its fur, she put her head against the side of the dog's face and muttered in its warmth, "Thank you, thank you." Susie rubbed against her twice and asked seriously, "Audrey, is this how a psychiatrist feels like?" "I like it very much." Audrey was suddenly at a loss on whether to laugh or cry. She immediately pursed her lips and promised, "Susie, we'll treat each other in the future." "Yes, psychological problems." "Okay, woof." Susie answered happily. It was only now with Audrey truly recovering that she was in the mood to examine her own advancement. "My body seems to have become healthier. Although I don't have any obvious muscles, my strength and speed have become much stronger than before. My eyesight has also improved. I can even clearly see items hidden in the dark. My sense of smell is able to distinguish even more subtle smells, and thus being able to grasp a target's truest emotions and thoughts. I finally have beyonder powers in the truest sense of the word. Yes, there's also awe. I can target a single person or apply it to a group of people within a certain range. They'll instantly panic and turn chaotic as though they're facing a dragon. Another is frenzy. It will trigger the emotions and mental state of a target, throwing the target into a frenzy. They'll suffer intense psychological damage and might even cause direct loss of control at times. Another is psychological cue. Through specific methods, words, and a medium, I can cue a target, letting them abide by my arrangements without them realizing it. Or they might strongly abide by a particular promise from the bottom of their hearts. Another is placate, also known as psychoanalysis. I can help beyonders on the brink of losing control to regain their reason and escape danger. There's a certain chance of failure. The higher my sequence, the more easily it will succeed. It can calm down various psychological instabilities and allow for communication. Another is telepathy. Through mediums like candlelight and extracts, it will put the target in a partially hypnotic state. I'll then be able to directly communicate with their body of heart and mind, just like what Hilbert Alucard did to me. If not for the protection provided by Mr. Fool's angel, then I wouldn't have the means to lie under such situations. Yes. I have to be on guard against such techniques. I can't be fooled by a target, and there should be quite a number of means to achieve this effect. With placate and telepathy, together with certain psychology knowledge, I'll be able to act as a true psychiatrist, the kind that can open a clinic. Audrey's mood rapidly improved. She finally had the feeling that she had matured and become a qualified beyonder. I'm a mid-sequence beyonder. There really is a qualitative change. She stood up, lifted her skirt, and walked briskly around in a circle. She quickly discovered that she was still lacking in direct offensive abilities as a psychiatrist. Fortunately, I have this. Audrey stopped in front of the experiment table and opened a plain brown box. Inside the box was a silver mask that could only cover half a face. It was the mystical item that the hanged man had sold her. Audrey picked it up, placed it in her palm, and observed it for a few seconds. Then, she extended her spirituality and projected her thoughts just like how she did above the gray fog. She saw the silver mask begin to warp inwards, turning into a hollow, finely patterned, slightly large earring. It might be better to turn it into a necklace, Audrey whispered. Afterward, she tried out the various abilities of this magical item. She was most satisfied with her ability to fine-tune her appearance. It's a pity that other than flame controlling, it doesn't have any other more direct offensive powers. Perhaps I'll need to prepare a revolver, one that has beyonder effects. Audrey thought with some regret. She quickly collected her emotions and said to the mystical item in her hand with an uplifted tone towards the end, "From today, your name is Lie. The most beautiful lie. City of Generosity, Byam. 48 Acid Lemon Street, Wind of Azure Inn." It was raining heavily outside and the wind was raging, but inside the luxurious suite, the fireplace was warm and the environment peaceful. Klein sat in his chair and watched silently as Blazing Danitz dealt with the severe fracture on his left arm. He waited until Danitz was finished binding up his arm with shredded, old clothes before asking bluntly, "What treasure?" According to Danitz, it was because of some treasure that Admiral of Blood Senior wanted to deal with Vice Admiral Edwina Edwards. The sound of wind and rain came through the window. Danitz took a sip of the Lanty-proof on the table and then gave a bitter, angry laugh. Those assholes who had their brains eaten by zombies. On our last expedition, we found a sunken ship. Although we didn't find anything of great value, we discovered a gigantic black iron key that doesn't look like the kind used by humans. Can you imagine? After being submerged under the sea for so many years, it hasn't rusted at all. Yes, Klein replied in a concise manner. In a world where extraordinariness and mystery intertwined, what wasn't possible? There were people who could be resurrected from the dead, not to mention others. Danitz choked and paused for 7 or 8 seconds before he knew what to say next. Perhaps there's a traitor among us, and the news has spread. Countless pirates believe that this is Death's key, a key that can open the treasure trove Death left behind. I thought that this problem would be cleared up very quickly and happily applied for a vacation. In the end, the matter became more complicated. Even Admiral of Blood has joined the ranks of these mad pirates. I'm even beginning to suspect that it's Death's key, a key that can turn one into a true god. Foolish. Klein calmly gave his evaluation. Whether it was in the divination domain or dealing with deities, he could be considered experienced. Thus, he had his own understanding and confidence in the interpretation of Death's key. He believed that the key was a form of revelation, a symbol. The thing that opened Death's treasure trove was probably not in the shape of a key, but some kind of characteristic, bloodline, or even certain, specified people and their descendants. Danitz was startled for 2 seconds, and then he exclaimed, "Your words are exactly the same as Captain's previous comments, and even your expressions are very similar." She suspects that the key belongs to an older era, an era not of humans. Before the cataclysm, this world was still full of giants, dragons, elves, and demonic wolves. The shape of the key indirectly points to one of them. Demonic wolves. Klein suddenly recalled the ravings he often heard during his past advancements. In it, the Phlegria he heard referred to the ancient god, Annihilation demonic wolf. A treasure that involves the second epoch. He held back his curiosity and switched to calmly saying, "Write down everything that Admiral of Blood has done, including Steel Mavedi and his men." He remembered that Admiral of Blood and his pirate crew were the most notorious groups on the ocean. Their hands were stained with blood as they committed heinous sins. How can I remember? They aren't beauties like Captain. Danitz threw up his hands. I can only list the most important things and some of the details that have left an impression on me. Wait, what do you want to do? Bit by bit, Klein revealed a smile, one that gave Danitz a fright. He said in a deep voice, "If it's appropriate, I want to hunt them." Chapter 520, Admiral of Blood, hunt them? Danitz asked subconsciously. When he truly understood the meaning behind Gehrman Sparrow's words, he instantly became excited. He changed his seating posture and suppressed his voice. "Is there anything I can help you with?" As a qualified, part-time pirate, he had nothing to do with beautiful words such as tolerance, compassion, and love. Since he had nearly died at the hands of Steel Mavedi and now had the chance to take revenge, he definitely wouldn't miss it. He believed that he could survive in the pirate industry by relying on an accurate grasp of the situation, knowing when to resist, when to fight for his life, when to feign ignorance when seeing his enemies, and when to settle old scores. And now, this was an opportunity. Danitz still couldn't make an accurate judgment on how powerful Gehrman Sparrow was, but judging from how he had taken care of the fallen Bishop Millet within 10 seconds, it was unlikely that it would be too difficult for him to deal with Steel Mavedi. Even if he encountered the Admiral of Blood, Senor, it wasn't impossible for him to win. Of course, this is in a one-on-one situation, and pirates never talk about chivalry. Danitz thought to himself. Klein leaned forward a little, placed his elbows on his knees, and clasped his hands. "I've told you." "Ah. What?" Danitz felt that he was often unable to keep up with Gehrman Sparrow's train of thought. With regards to this, he could only console himself that a normal person and a madman were different. Seeing that the other party had stopped talking, he thought for a while and finally remembered what he had to do. Write down everything that Admiral of Blood and his pirate crew had done. Gehrman Sparrow definitely wants to know how many things they've plundered. Danitz quickly gathered his thoughts, rummaged around the room for a pen and paper, and scribbled a chunk of text. During this process, he was exceptionally glad that it was his left arm that was injured. When he was done writing, Klein reached out for it, read it carefully, and confirmed from the undetailed parts of Danitz's description that Admiral of Blood was the most typical and vile of pirates. Not only did they plunder, but they also abducted people, slaughtered crew members, and abused women. A pirate like Danitz actually knows how to write ancient Fasak. He's also been educated. After muttering to himself, Klein took out a copper penny and used divination to confirm the authenticity of the material. Then he said in a tone as though he was giving instructions on what was to be eaten tomorrow morning, "Tell me about the Admiral of Blood and his men. He needs more detailed information. Is he preparing to hunt them?" Danitz was delighted, hating himself for not knowing enough. Admiral of Blood Senor is suspected to be an evil spirit. Anyone who has encountered him has died a bizarre death. Either they strangle themselves to death, blow their mouths up, hug bombs, or slaughter their companions. Captain said that it's the possession of an evil spirit. It's very similar to Miss Sharon's Beyonder powers. Wraith? Klein didn't speak as he listened to Danitz go on, in silence. Senor can make a terrible shriek. The last time I fought them, I was nearly knocked unconscious and fell off the deck and into the sea. Ha, I returned the favor and set one of their boats on fire. Senor knows a lot of undead magic. Cruel, bloodthirsty, and full of desire. His targets can be either male or female, and even humanoid creatures. Consistent with the unrestrained nature of the Rose school of thought. Yes, accurately speaking, it's a trait of the prisoner pathway. The highest probability is that he's a wraith. Klein nodded thoughtfully. In response, Danitz became more active and spoke a little faster. Our captain thinks that Senor has a very powerful mystical item on him, one that makes him very lucky. He always seems to gain the favor of the gods. For example, at a critical moment, his opponent would suddenly slip or have their powers fail. Another example is winning 21 bets in a row. A mystical item that can make someone lucky. This is very rare. It's from the monster pathway. Or is it connected to some other evil spirit? Klein guessed based on his own knowledge of mysticism. I've never directly fought Senor, so that's all I know. Danitz wanted to throw his hands up, but he was stopped by the pain in his left arm. He has about 7 or 8 ships. His flagship is the Tree of Flesh and Blood. Ha, that's different from us. We mainly seek out treasure and wouldn't take in anyone. Therefore, we only have the Golden Dream. It's no wonder the Admiral of Blood's bounty is much higher than Vice Admiral Iceberg, reaching 42,000 pounds. In terms of strength, he should be a bit stronger. Klein immediately gained an understanding. He maintained the same posture as before, seemingly unaffected by the intelligence regarding the Admiral of Blood. What about his subordinates? Danitz was long prepared as he immediately said, Senor has 10 of his strongest men under his command, the first, second, third mates of the flagship, and the captain of each ship. Steel Mavedi is the second mate of the flagship. We think that he's a sequence 6. His body is like steel and is able to withstand bullets and cannonballs. He isn't afraid of fire, drowning, and various magic. He's strong and fast. He can rip his opponent apart, and he grasps a certain level of undead-related spells. He can summon zombies and rear puppets, zombie. Klein immediately thought of Merrick who played cards with zombies. Based on the wraith traits of Admiral of Blood Senor, can it be assumed that these pirates are actually part of the outer circle of the Rose School of Thought, or perhaps they're from an organization used to make money? It's a pity that I don't have a messenger, nor did I ask Miss Sharon if she had one. Otherwise, I could contact her and confirm the Admiral of Blood's identity. Klein guessed with some regret. He didn't give up just because this matter might involve the Rose School of Thought. In any case, he could change his face and identity afterwards. In addition, he had involved himself with the Aurora Order, the Demonist Sect, Rose Redemption, and Twilight Hermit Order, so he wasn't afraid of offending another entity. Actually, it's not like I've never fought against the Rose School of Thought. I've already killed a wraith, a zombie, and a wraith, and I've robbed the Scarlet Lunar Corona and biological poison bottle. Klein suddenly realized how much trouble he had been involved in. It's unlikely that Mavedi has any particularly powerful mystical items, otherwise, I might not have been able to escape before, Danitz said, feeling somewhat relieved at his luck. He has a bunch of puppets and zombies by his side, as well as several subordinates at sequence 7 or 8. As the second mate of the flagship, he should be the leader of the crew in the vicinity since he's here. We can consider hunting him first. Below the high sequences, once the number of Beyonders reaches a certain amount, a qualitative change will occur. With the combination of different abilities, it's possible for a group to defeat a Beyonder stronger than themselves. It's just like how a Nighthawk's team can definitely take down a Sequence 6, or even a Sequence 5. Klein didn't underestimate Steel Mavedi and his men just because he was stronger with creeping hunger. He was still as cautious as before. I have to plan and prepare well. Well, the frequency bands and passcodes I received from White Shark will come in handy, and once Miss Magician's radio transceiver is delivered, I'll get Danitz to frequently monitor the frequency and see if we can glean any information, allowing me to go in quickly to reap the harvest. And I can take advantage of this period to explore the possibility of true acting. Soon, Klein formulated a plan as he continued to listen to Danitz tell him about the rest of Admiral of Blood's subordinates. After a while, when Danitz was finally done, he summarized enthusiastically, "If Steel Mavedi can be killed, leaving my name behind, this matter will definitely go on the papers. Once it's spread, I no longer need to worry about informing Captain." He was afraid that a traitor was among their ranks and that all the points of contact in the Rorstad archipelago were under the enemy's control. Therefore, he didn't dare to rashly make contact. He was still vexed over the problem of alerting his captain. "He actually has a brain." Klein nodded and said, "You're in charge of gathering information on all aspects of steel." "All right." Danitz replied with a grim smile, thinking of the punch that had nearly pierced his heart in the evening. Klein slowly stood up and walked towards the window. It was dark outside with howling winds and pouring rain. It looked as if the end of the world had arrived. Thinking of what he was going to do next, he couldn't help but feel like he was acting in a certain sense. Smiling, he muttered to himself in a low voice, "Tonight, Gehrman joins the hunt. City of Generosity, Byam, in the Cathedral of Waves." Alger Wilson, who had received the sanguine's anesthetic gas, was about to sail out to sea for another of the Windblast's main ingredients, when he was summoned by the local diocese bishop. There have been rumors recently that Vice Admiral Iceberg received death's key. All the pirates in the Sonia Sea are roused by this, the bishop said in a heavy voice. "Investigate this matter." He was an old man with a head full of white hair, but he was still as energetic as ever. His speech was even faster than a young man's, as though he could charge out at any moment and personally resolve all problems. His body was strong, his muscles bulging with his bishop's robe. The wind howled around him as he breathed, and the air was moist. There are similar rumors every year, but they all end up being fake. Such rumors are commonly spread across the sea. Even if it's true, I don't have the right to be involved. There's no need to take the risk. I'll just go through the motions and skirt the edge of this matter." Alger muttered inwardly. He solemnly clenched his fist and struck his left breast. "Yes, Your Excellency. May the storm be with you." Diocese Bishop Chogo was very pleased with Alger's attitude and returned the same salute. "May the storm be with you." The encouraged Alger Wilson quickly left the cathedral and returned to the square outside. The storm last night had subsided, and only the scattered leaves and water puddles on the ground remained as evidence of its coming. After taking a breath of after-rain fresh air, Alger decided to visit the few places where pirates roamed. He planned to put on a show of working hard by trying to seek out information. If he were to meet a fellow with a bounty of a few £100, he wouldn't mind apprehending the poor bastard. In his opinion, they were liquid cash flow that could be added to his savings. Chapter 521, Bold Assumption on the Ocean. Pirates had three iconic common interests: liquor, women, and gambling. Alger Wilson merely took out his silver pocket watch, flipped it open, and knew where he should go first. At 11:15, the brothels and bars hadn't opened. Only the gambling dens would have easily gathered a bunch of people who wanted to make a fortune. Alger was more familiar with this port city than his tiny hometown. He proceeded without stopping at all while he navigated his way, smoothly turning at every corner until he arrived outside a casino that was located in a secluded alley. According to what he knew, the owner of this casino was a gang leader with a deep background. He had an inexplicable but indistinct connection with the important figure at the Governor-General's office. It was the first choice for many pirates to purchase and sell their stolen goods. Because of this, pirates often appeared here. They might exchange their loot for gold pounds in the morning, but they would lose everything at night and get thrown out. Alger pulled on his thick brown coat, pressed down his cap, a piece of fashion where that came from the mainland, and pushed open the half-closed door. Under the watchful gaze of the bouncers, he entered the casino. Casinos were prohibited within the Lone Kingdom. They could only be attached to bars as rooms, but in the kingdom's vast overseas colonies, not only were they legal, but they were also a mainstay industry. Among them, Byam of the Rorstad archipelago and Aelda of East Balam were the most famous in the area. Many tycoons would specially visit them from Backlund or Mid-Seashire's coast for a big day of gambling. Surveying the area, Alger saw a variety of card games, as well as dice-derived turntable games. As it was still early, there weren't many gamblers, and Alger quickly scanned them all. Suddenly, his eyes lit up, and he instantly recognized the identity of a disguised person. He took off his hat, walked up to a Texas poker table, and patted his target's shoulder. He bent down and whispered into the man's ear, blazing. Danitz happened to be flipping the corner of his card with his right hand, so he almost jumped out of his skin from the slap and nearly sent a fireball towards the guy behind him. After he had been attacked by Steel Mavedi, he knew that he shouldn't seek out information with his true appearance, as he could be targeted by greedy pirates. Although most pirates weren't strong and didn't register as a threat to Danitz, he still didn't want to reveal himself, lest it set back the plan of hunting Steel Mavedi. However, to his surprise, the disguise he took great effort to don was exposed just an hour after he left home. He turned his head quickly to the side and glanced through the corner of his eye at the person who had greeted him. When he saw the signature seaweed-like dark blue hair, Danitz relaxed a little and turned to observe if the other players had heard the greeting. The gamblers were all carefully studying their hidden card, either folding or continuing, with none of them paying attention to what was happening over at his side. "Why are you here?" Danitz asked casually. He and Alger had met at the previous private meet, and he knew that the other party had a ghost ship and a dozen sailors. He was quite a powerful but unknown fellow. According to Vice Admiral Iceberg's judgment, if such a small and weak pirate crew was able to retain an ancient ghost ship, it meant that they were backed by a powerful faction. Perhaps they were members of the Church of Storms, or perhaps they were related to a particular pirate king or secret organization. They usually disguised themselves as ordinary pirates and gathered information for who they were really loyal to. It was easy to wipe any traces of themselves clean at scheduled times, and at times, do things inconvenient for the power backing them. For example, silencing others or plundering certain special items. There were quite a few pirate crews like this, and no one would particularly be bothered about such matters. Alger pulled over a nearby chair and sat down. He tilted his head and asked in a low voice, "I heard that your captain obtained Death's Key." Danitz snorted with a laugh. "I thought you had a brain, but you've disappointed me. How can such a thing be so easily obtainable? We'll definitely sell it if you want it and offer a decent price. How about it? Do you want to consider this deal?" Alger casually said, "Perhaps it has other secrets. Maybe someone wants to deal with your captain. Who knows?" Dogs hit. Annoyed by his new hand, Danitz cursed out loud. Then, he suppressed his voice and said, "That thing doesn't seem like a creation made by humans. It might belong to the giants or devils." "Creation? Your captain still insists on teaching language to all of you?" Alger asked with amusement. The rumor was that Vice Admiral Iceberg was a woman who was very strict when it came to knowledge. She couldn't stand the sight of a bunch of illiterates under her command, so every day on the Golden Dream, there was a class of general knowledge and reading, and every day she forced the crew to take turns participating. Wishing he could forget it, Danitz said, "It's much more difficult than fighting. Because of this, we're usually unable to recruit enough crew members. Every time we dock at the port to resupply, there will be people who resign." He didn't continue with the topic. Looking at the dealer, he said to himself, "Help me keep an eye out for Steele's whereabouts." "Steel Mavedi? Admiral of Blood's second mate?" Alger looked down at Blazing's left arm, which was slightly propped up with a splint, and asked, "Were you attacked?" "For the key. His brain has already been eaten by his zombies." Danitz stressed. "You want to seek revenge on him?" Alger guessed from the other's tone and request. He. Danitz smiled without a reply, looking as though he was concentrating on his new hidden card. Alger thought for a moment before saying, "The last time your captain appeared was 7 days ago, near Sonia Island." This was confirmed by a telegram. The Golden Dream wouldn't arrive in Byam that quickly. "Do you have a new helper?" "If it's just you alone, then you aren't a match for Steele even if he were alone. And as you know, he's always attended to by a crowd." Towards Alger's question, Dannett's response was to throw out a chip. "Call." "Who is it?" Alger first assumed that Dannett's attitude was a tacit agreement. He pinned his hopes by asking since it was a riskless endeavor. Dannett stared at the exposed cards and answered simply, "You wouldn't know." "I wouldn't know." Someone who has the strength to deal with Steele Mavady should be someone with a little fame at sea regardless of if they're a pirate or an adventurer. Unless they belong to a specific secret organization, or it's their first time traveling the seas. Of course, it's also possible that Dannett doesn't wish to answer, for fear of exposing a secret. That's most probable. Someone belonging to a particular organization, first time traveling the seas, with the strength to deal with Steele Mavady. Alger looked up slightly as he suddenly had a bold guess. He tapped on the edge of the table and asked, as if he were chatting about the weather, "Was Bancy Harbor fun?" He emphasized the word fun. Dannett turned his head in surprise and blurted out, "How did you know?" He believed that with the Church of Storm's style, it was impossible for it to air dirty linen. Furthermore, the passengers of the White Agate had just arrived last night. The people who had witnessed the developments had all signed confidentiality agreements, so how could the news spread so quickly? Alger smiled without answering. At this moment, he understood the value of Emperor Roselle's words, boldly hypothesize and carefully verify. Dannett put away his winnings and muttered, "It's no big deal." There was a revival of some ancient customs that led to the fall of a storm bishop. As expected. Alger chuckled and said, "I'll help you keep an eye out for Steele." "But how can I contact you?" 15 Amiris Avenue is an unoccupied house. Write the information on a piece of paper and throw it in, Dannett answered hesitantly. Alger nodded and stood up while patting Blazing Dannett on the shoulder. "Don't forget my payment." He turned around and walked towards the door. Watching the captain of the ghost ship depart, Dannett couldn't help but grumble. "This fellow isn't bad. However, I have to leave this place too." He couldn't quite trust Alger. Perhaps in a few minutes, he might lead Steele Mavady and his pirates to rush over. After leaving the casino, Alger, who was wearing a pair of local baggy pantaloons, strolled down the street. He entered a department store and found a counter. He smiled and took out a handful of bronze pennies. "Give me a deck of tarot cards." While he was waiting, he leisurely thought of a question: what is the adorer of Mr. the Fool doing at this time in Old John's restaurant? Klein watched as the waiter placed a plate of grilled fish in front of him. It was wrapped with something that looked like straw and covered with all sorts of spices, some of which he didn't recognize. The strong aroma seeped into Klein's nose and greatly enhanced his salivation. As expected of the Spice Archipelago. Klein was about to pick up his knife and fork when he saw the waiter place two things resembling tree branches on his plate. "Chopsticks?" Klein was shocked. Then he quickly locked on to the suspect, Roselle Gustave. "This is the kind of cutlery you have to use when eating grilled stickleback." It's said that Emperor Roselle gained inspiration from the customs of the elves, the waiter introduced. The customs of the elves? They are indeed a race that likes cooking and eating delicacies. Or rather, it's purely an excuse Roselle came up with. Klein guessed, largely as a result of his understanding of that particular person's character. In the morning, he had gone to a few church hospitals in Byam to provide hospice care for some dying people, to help them fulfill their wishes, and to engage in a deeper level of acting, but he had failed to find a suitable target. This wasn't to say that no one died in the hospital, but rather it was that they all had relatives who either accompanied them or had witnessed their deaths. There was no possibility of disguising himself as the deceased apart from giving people a fright. I'll head to the bar where adventurers gather. There should be many foreigners who might die in a dark corner like stray dogs in order to pursue wealth at sea, while their families might never hear of them again. Klein suppressed his thoughts and focused on his delicious food. Chapter 522, Colony. The quality of Sickleback's meat was certainly not as good as that of Murloc meat, but the spices synergized to form clear layered flavors which Klein was rather delighted to have tasted. He just couldn't stop himself from eating after the first bite. Actually, there are some local beyonders who wish to leave this dangerous circle and lead a normal life. It's completely possible for them to head to Backlund and open a roasted cuisine restaurant, selling grilled fish as their specialty. With the city's acceptance for many things, their business definitely wouldn't be bad. The only problem is that many spices aren't as cheap as they are here. The cost will be very high, and a location has to be chosen to cater to the target group. Klein put down his rather crude chopsticks and wiped his mouth with a napkin, letting his mind wander. In his view, commoners were unable to find the means to get rich, mostly because they didn't have enough vision. However, one's vision was also limited by the education they received and their daily experiences. Bound by social class, it was really hard to escape from it and break through this limitation. The most effective way was to strive for a higher level of education, and the second was to take risks and head out on an adventure. Of course, the risk was huge, and many people vanished silently while taking this path. Klein spent 2 soldi and 5 pence for this meal, which wasn't cheap, but he had always been willing to spend money on good food. Besides, his main expenses had been paid for by Danitz recently. Pulling at his collar, putting on his hat, and holding his black cane, he walked out of Old John's restaurant, just in time to see a police officer driving a tramp out of the street. The natives of the Rorsted archipelago had darker skin than the people of the southern continent. It was close to the kind of bronze which was often a result of exposure to the sun. Their hair was mostly dark and naturally curled ever so slightly. They were quite different from the colonists from the Lone Kingdom. It has been less than 50 years since the place had been completely colonized. At first, Lone had worked with the local kings and chieftains, under the name of the Mid-Sonia Company to extract economic benefits, but later, the management of the company quickly fell into corruption as they fought for power, even provoking the enemy for personal gain by starting a war. What was even more absurd was that they would report each other, claiming that their competitors had received bribes. With regards to this, they would find a member of parliament backing them. During parliamentary hearings, they would attack each other, something that nearly resulted in suits. The natives would never have imagined that the powerful figures, who could make their kings and chieftains bend over, kiss the soles of their shoes, and deliver carts and carts of gifts, were actually unimportant people who weren't even members of parliament in Backlund. Although most of them came from noble families, they were at the end of the line of any inheritance rights. After that dispute, the king and the prime minister agreed to redeem the stock, shut down the Mid-Sonia Company, and to send their fleet and troops to take over the Rorsted archipelago in full force, bringing them under true colonial rule. At present, the archipelago was governed by the Governor-General's office, Parliament, and the courts. The upper echelons were all Loanese, and some of the middle-ranking personnel were members of Parliament and court magistrates who were descendants of the original kings and chieftains. As for the low-ranking positions, they were open to the educated natives of the region. This included police officers below that of superintendents. It was a native policeman who was driving off the tramp with a baton, and his target similarly was of distinct Rorsted descent. As soon as the policeman saw Klein in his double-breasted frock coat, half-top hat, and black, civilized cane, he immediately put away his baton, straightened up, held his feet together, and saluted. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I help you?" Klein felt mixed emotions as he gently nodded. "Are there no carriages here?" According to the regulations of the Governor-General's office, carriages aren't allowed to enter this street. "You'll have to walk to the street ahead," the policeman explained with both fear and enthusiasm. "Thank you." Klein casually praised him, "You speak good Loanese." The policeman was so pleasantly surprised that he became excited. "I think, I think that this is an essential quality that a good policeman should possess. He originally wanted to say that he felt that he too was Loanese, but he was afraid the gentleman across him would end up angry. Klein secretly sighed and slowly walked to the corner of the street. Along the way, he saw that the local style of clothing was very different from that of mainland cities such as Backlund and Tianjin. It was even different from ports such as Demir and Bansi, which had been colonized for more than 200 years. A decent man from Lone, dressed in a formal suit, wearing a top hat and a tie, and holding onto a civilized cane. This made the people around him subservient, afraid to look him in the eye or touch him. The rest of the natives or mixed bloods liked matching a thick jacket with baggy pants, along with a cap from the mainland. They didn't like black, and they preferred the colors, brown, tawny, and light gray. To Klein, this was indeed a little strange, but it also gave him a feeling of coming to a foreign country. Of course, the natives of higher standing and those of mixed blood also mimicked the dressing style of Lone, believing that this was a sign of civilization. 2 p.m., Swordfish Bar, an accepted gathering spot for adventurers. There weren't many customers, so Klein easily made his way through the tables to the bar. He discovered that what was different from the other places was that there were 3 blackboards on the side of the bar that were supported by wooden shelves. Sitting on them were yellowing notices in white, with a variety of content, strange and varied. Some were hiring bodyguards, some were seeking help in finding people, some were investigating the situation on a particular island, and some were offering a high reward for the head of a particular pirate, while others claimed that they had obtained a treasure map and wanted to form a team. In short, the affairs that had been divided up between the private detectives and security companies in the Lone Kingdom still belonged to the adventurers here. A glass of Zarhar. Klein tapped the surface of the bar counter. It was a local malt beer, cheap and tasty, with a unique taste. It was loved by adventurers, something Klein had learned from Blazing Dannets. 3 pence. The bartender casually glanced at the customer, not showing any change in his attitude because of the stranger's unfamiliar face. With a beer in hand, Klein sat in a high chair in front of the bar, sipping bit by bit as he quietly listened to the drinkers around him. Through their conversations, he searched for a worthy target. After nearly an hour, when the number of people in the bar increased, Klein finally heard something that might be useful. His spirit was jolted and he became increasingly focused. There were 4 people sitting at the table less than 3 meters away from him. They were feeling sorry for a man named Went. I always thought Went was out at sea. I didn't expect him to be at home. He's very sick. Sigh, if I had knocked on his door 2 days earlier, he wouldn't have died. You don't know how terrifying the room was. Mushrooms were growing on his body in huge swaths of white. Dogs hit. Stop it. Can't you see I'm eating sausages? Yes, yes, yes. Went's room was filled with bugs, moths, flies, butterflies, bees, and cockroaches. Holy Lord of Storms, I couldn't believe this was a place where a human can live. Even the police who came later were stunned. As the conversation passed into his ears, Klein slightly frowned, feeling that Went's death wasn't normal. Within a few days of his death, his corpse was already filled with mushrooms, and insects were crawling all over the room. Something Beyonder related? With such an anomaly, the police would definitely report the matter to the mandated Punisher team. It sounds like it happened 3 or 4 days ago. The things that needed to be taken care of should have been dealt with already. Klein seriously considered whether he should pay a visit to take a look. At the very least, the man called Went was a lone adventurer in Byam. None of his peers wished to help him transmit the news of his death. After listening for a long time, he gained a rough idea of where the place Went rented was. It was at the nearby 47 Blackhorn Street. Having finished drinking the last drop of the Zarhar beer, Klein put on his hat, left the bar, and headed for the apartment. After entering the door, he half closed his eyes and murmured to himself, the room that recently had someone die in. He repeated the statement 7 times in a row, used his cane to quickly and easily arrive outside the room where Went used to live. It hadn't been rented out yet, and the anomaly inside had already been dealt with. There seemed to be nothing wrong with it. Klein put away the note he had used to open the door, locked the door behind him, and walked around carefully. After confirming the situation, he took out extract, essential oils, herbs, powders, and special candles, and he quickly set up a spirit channeling ritual in front of the bed. Although it had been several days, making it only possible for him to obtain the most superficial, disjointed, and remnant bits of information, Klein thought that it was better to have some than nothing. Without a doubt, he prayed to himself and entered the space above the gray fog. He responded and gave himself the power to channel the spirit. The flame of the candle suddenly soared, tinged with a ghostly blue as it swayed. Klein only felt everything fall silent, as if he had entered a realm that didn't belong to reality. His pupils were completely black, and even the whites of his eyes had been expelled. He no longer needed to use the technique of dream divination. Having advanced to faceless, with the help of the gray fog that made an initial entry into the real world, he was able to directly see the lingering spirituality of Went, a will that refused to dissipate. There were 3 scenes. One was of a tall, thin, dark, curly-haired, sharp-featured Went coming to the body of a discarded corpse, astonished to see a glimmer from it before it condensed into a green gem filled with an aura of vitality. The second scene was of Went lying on his bed with his eyes closed, his mouth slightly open. His skin was covered with mushrooms of all kinds, the surrounding cockroaches and moths piled on top of each other, and on his chest, a silver necklace embedded with the same green gem from before. The third scene was of a pretty girl with flaxen-colored hair sitting at the edge of the sea with her eyes slightly moist. Lingering around her was Went's reluctant voice. "Rain, I'm about to die. I'm really regretful that I never told you that I love you. I want you to marry me." The picture shattered, and the spirit channeling came to an end. Klein looked around and saw that the house was still dark and gloomy. "This fellow is truly unlucky." Klein shook his head and sighed. He already had a rough idea of the cause of Went's death, his random act of picking up something. The vast majority of Beyonders didn't know about the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation and indestructibility, and they had never thought that the deceased of their kind would be able to release a characteristic that could become an ingredient. As this process was relatively slow, it was easy for them to be missed. Therefore, after killing a Beyonder, they would usually search the corpse and throw it away, making passers-by like Went to luck out or some other creatures at the bottom of the sea or in the wilderness. Went didn't know that it was a Beyonder characteristic, and he had thought it to be a magical gem, thus, he made a necklace and kept it close to his body. Slowly, he was corrupted by the influence and died in agony. Chapter 523, Cooperation. By the time he left 47 Blackhorn Street, Klein had figured out Went's general situation. He had disguised himself as a police officer and learned from Went's neighbors. Simeem Island, the island at the farthest end of the Rørsted archipelago. From Byam, it'll take 4 to 5 hours to get there by liner, and there are only 2 trips a day, at 9 a.m. and 10 a.m., respectively. Went's parents are long dead and he has no relatives. The only person involved is a girl he just can't forget, Rain. She's the perfect target for my first performance of acting as someone else. But just thinking about how I need to confess on Went's behalf, it feels so awkward. If the girl agrees. Damn, how am I supposed to wrap things up? Klein thought with a troubled expression. He tried to recall the novels he had read and the movies and TV dramas he had watched, hoping for the most perfect solution. Soon, he had a general idea of what to do, stabilizing his mood in the process. His thoughts began to drift towards the matter regarding Steel Mavedi. I hope Miss Magician will get a radio transceiver as soon as possible. Klein sighed silently and got onto a rental carriage. Backlund, Sherwood Borough. Furs opened a letter Zio had brought back. It came from the science fiction novelist, Avil, who was pleased to share with Ma'am Walt the future development and applications of radio technology. Furs directly skipped over the beginning and middle content, her eyes sweeping over to the end. He introduced 3 types, with detailed addresses and approximate prices. The most expensive is just £12. Furs nodded slightly, feeling that this wasn't a very important business transaction. She suddenly felt her self-esteem was a little inflated. Perhaps because she had seen so many hundreds and thousands of pounds transactions in the Tarot Club, she no longer paid much notice to anything in the range of £10. Mr. World has the resources and finances. In the future, I might need to buy items from him or sell things I don't need. Yes, I'll just add postage, my transportation costs, and the price of the materials expended for the ritual to the original price. Furs made up her mind quickly, and she subconsciously looked out of the window. Backland was still gloomy and dark, with a light drizzle pattering down. However, the fog wasn't as thick as it was before. I wonder when I'll receive the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch from the sun. Furs couldn't wait to advance. In the Berg household in the City of Silver. Having already prepared the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch and the materials Mr. Hanged Man wished to acquire, Derek was in no hurry to sacrifice them to Mr. Fool. He planned to wait a little longer, until the chief was leading an expedition team or was presiding over a particular sacrificial ritual, before making an attempt. This is the safest and most reliable way. Yes, be careful, be cautious. Derek reminded himself before flipping open the Giant King's Court, Book of Blackrock, hand-copied edition. Recently, he had been reading this ancient tome. From it, he was able to understand some of the faces of the Giant King's Court from ancient times. According to the ancient tome, it was a court of God. Time seemed to have frozen there, as though it was suspended in eternal dusk. All the buildings were extremely grand and magnificent, even reaching into the clouds. Humans who walked inside were exceptionally small, and they revered the owner of this scene from the bottom of their hearts. Backlund, Hillston Borough, Waymandy's house. After listening to an explanation, Emlyn White combed his hair with his hand and intentionally asked, "Lord Baron, I forgot where I heard it from, but there was a very famous city named the City of Silver during the Second Epoch or in the early half of the Third Epoch." Waymandy was a vampire baron whose age exceeded 200 years. He didn't look old, and he instead looked like a mature gentleman in his early 30s. His black hair was neatly combed back, and he was wearing a dark red cotton shirt with a brown pipe in his hand. As he enjoyed the warmth of the fireplace, he said thoughtfully, "No, at least in my memory, there's no City of Silver before the Cataclysm." Before Emlyn could even revel in his joy, Waymandy went on to say to himself, "But there was a kingdom of silver which was originally ruled by the Giant King's Court and later came under its jurisdiction." Kingdom of Silver? Emlyn White thought for a while and said, "Lord Baron, is there anything more specific?" Waymandy looked up at him, smiled, and said reminiscently, "The Kingdom of Silver had a rather special position in the Giant King's Court. They didn't directly believe in the Giant King, Ormer, and instead, they believed in the Giant King's Court's queen, Omabella. City of Generosity, Byam, Dock Area. Acid Lemon Street, Wind of Azure Inn." Klein stood at the corner of the street, undid the topaz pendant on his left wrist, and divined to ensure that there was no danger ahead. With that in mind, he strolled back to the inn, went up to the 3rd floor, and opened the door of the luxurious suite. He was slightly surprised to find Blazing Danitz already back, slumped in his reclining chair, drinking. After a moment of consideration, Klein calmly asked, "What time is it?" "Isn't there a clock?" Danitz muttered. He looked at the wall opposite him and read out the time. 3:40 p.m. Before he finished his sentence, Danitz suddenly came to his senses, sat up straight, and laughed dryly. "I've already gone to the places I can get information from and asked the people I can ask. There's no need to stay outside any longer. It will increase the risk of exposure and affect your hunting plan." Klein found a chair and sat down, and he expressionlessly said, "Tell me what happened. What problems could there be?" Although I'm mainly an adventurer who hunts treasure, I'm also a qualified part-time pirate. Danitz felt that his abilities had been insulted. After being swept by Gehrman Sparrow with a cold glance, he smiled and gave a brief overview of the places he went, the people he met, and the news he had heard from the morning and afternoon. Hearing Danitz sigh that a captain of a ghost ship named Alger knew about Bansi Harbor, Klein suddenly wanted to frown. With Mr. Hanged Man's relationship with the Church of Storms, even before I controlled the world and actively mentioned it, he didn't know about the anomaly at Bansi Harbor, so how could this Alger have known? Is he some powerhouse of higher standing in the Church of Storms who's disguised as a pirate, or someone who has some sort of relationship with the heretics in Bansi Harbor? Mr. Hanged Man has been active in the surrounding seas, so there's a possibility that it's him. Klein's heart stirred as he recalled the characteristics of the Hanged Man. Above the gray fog, although he couldn't clearly see the other members' appearances, it was still obvious as to whether they were men or women and what their hair color was. Klein raised his hand to stop Danitz from speaking. He said in a low voice, "Very messy hair, dark blue in color. You know him. That guy isn't simple." Danitz sighed. "As expected." "Heh, I really didn't expect to meet him so easily." Klein didn't respond. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "Continue." Without thinking too much into it, Danitz gave a general description of what happened afterward and explained himself. "As you know, no one can be sure when they'll get anything when trying to get information. After finding everyone who could be found, the only thing one can do is wait patiently. This will definitely take a while. There's another solution that doesn't require waiting," Klein deliberately said in a flat tone. "What solution?" Danitz asked in surprise. Klein nudged his gold-rimmed glasses, the corners of his mouth curving into a smile. "Use bait." "Bait?" Danitz looked at him, momentarily puzzled. In just a second, he had come to his senses. Only he could be the bait. As for fishing for the enemy, no one cared if the bait was actually swallowed or not. One only cared if the prey could be pulled out. Simply put, bait was a highly risky species. That's not a great solution. Yes, that's what my intuition tells me. I should be able to gain something from the Red Theater. I'll go over there to take a look." Danitz took his coat as he eagerly rushed out the door. Klein originally wanted to tail far behind Blazing and see if he could find any clues, but suddenly he heard layers of illusory prayers. It came from a man. Klein paused thoughtfully and turned into the washroom. 10 seconds later, he appeared above the gray fog. He saw the crimson star that represented the Hanged Man constantly burgeoning and shrinking. As expected. Klein sat down, leaned back in his chair, and emanated his spirituality. The voice of the Hanged Man became clearer. "Honorable Mr. Fool, I'm currently instigating a key related to Vice Admiral Iceberg. I met Blazing Danitz at a casino and learned that he was a witness at the anomaly in Bansi Harbor. I also learned that he plans to join forces with a powerful figure to deal with Steel Mavedi. I suspect that Blazing Danitz is working with your adorer, so I've prayed to you. If this is indeed the case, and if he wishes to receive a certain degree of assistance, I can be of some help. Mr. Hanged Man has indeed guessed Gehrman Sparrow's identity. He likely only had his suspicions, but he successfully obtained verification by inquiring about Bansi Harbor from Danitz. This is also good. With the help of an experienced local, the plan to hunt Steel Mavedi would be much smoother. Unless it directly affects the Fool, there's no meaning for the Hanged Man to entrap an adorer. Judging from his expression and attitude, he doesn't have any suspicions towards the Fool yet. I didn't leave any loopholes." Klein's thoughts raced, and he quickly made his decision. After making a divination, he conjured the world and covered the dummy with fog. He placed him in a praying stance and answered solemnly, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I am in need of some assistance." After finishing this scene, Klein threw the voice along with the scene into the crimson star symbolizing the Hanged Man. Chapter 524, meeting 5 p.m., Olive Tree Avenue, Pam's Divination Lodge. Alger Wilson pushed open a brown wooden door with panes of glass situated above it, and he entered the cafe that had a mysticism theme. He ordered a cup of Fermo coffee from the Paz Valley on the Star Highlands of the southern continent. He took out the tarot cards he had bought earlier and placed it beside him. The top card was the Hanged Man, depicting an angel hanging upside down with his hands tied behind his back. Unlike this morning, he had changed into a dark, classical robe and wore a clergyman's biretta, like a warlock or magician from folklore. After taking in a silent breath, Alger slowly sipped his coffee. He didn't show any anxiety from waiting. After about 5 or 6 minutes, the thick brown wooden door opened again, and a young man in a black tweed coat and a half-top hat came in. The gentleman's appearance wasn't even 30 years of age. His face was thin and angular. He had both a mature and gloomy temperament. It was none other than Klein, who had slightly modified his appearance and changed his persona. He wasn't wearing gold-rimmed glasses, but his eyesight was unaffected. With a casual sweep with his eyes, his gaze landed on Alger's dark blue sideburns. Klein looked down and saw the Hanged Man card placed face up on the deck. Without a word, he walked over, took off his hat, and sat down opposite Alger. He said with a grim smile, "I'd like to have a divination." As he spoke, he had already taken in the appearance of the most senior member of the Tarot Club. Deep facial features, rough outline, with a clear weathered look. It's obvious he was a person adept at fighting and is often outdoors. His skin is bronze in color, but it differs from that of the natives. He's like the result of a pure Loanese being battered by the elements for years, but the dark blue hair is more peculiar, something that doesn't belong to Lone. It's closer to the colonists of Desi Bay who live in Berserk Sea region. Mixed blood. Klein made his judgment. Alger looked at the gentleman across him, slowly superimposing his image with that of the world. Then, he pushed out the tarot card and said in a low voice, "This requires you to shuffle and cut your own cards." Klein reached out and picked them up, spreading them fully to take them in. Following that, he gathered them together and did a reshuffle. He cut the cards continuously, took out 3 cards, and placed them in an arrangement of past, present, and future. Klein slowly leaned back, but he turned over the middle tarot card with his right hand. It showed a naked woman wearing only a purple silk scarf, surrounded by a green wreath like a door. This was the world, numbered 21. Number 22 returned to 0, symbolizing the Fool. "How should I interpret this?" Klein asked deliberately. Although the Hanged Man hadn't explicitly mentioned that the world was the adorer of the Fool, Klein didn't think it was necessary to hope otherwise. He felt that being honest about it aided in establishing his image. If Alger hadn't guessed it, then it was an act of being open and confident. If Alger already knew about the matter, it would make the world appear at ease, as if everything was within his grasp. He knows I know. He already believes that I've guessed it before raising the topic above the gray fog. Impressive. Alger's heart skipped a beat as he replied at a moderate pace, "It's inverted. It means that things will fail due to a lack of preparation." "What kind of preparations are needed?" Klein thoughtfully nodded and asked. Alger took back all the tarot cards apart from the world and skillfully reshuffled and cut the cards. Then, he flipped open the top card. It was the Hierophant. Alger's voice remained deep and low. "You need advice. You need the help of faith and religion to avoid going down the wrong path." Without waiting for Klein to speak, he followed the sequence and turned over the second card. On it was the moon which overlooked the land. "You will be confused, you will be exhausted, and you will be wandering in your dreams, but this is only temporary." Next, Alger handed over a third tarot card. It was the sun. "Everything shall pass, and the light will shine upon the land." He spoke like a charlatan. Klein remained silent for a few seconds, then seemingly asked for confirmation. "Church, dream, sun?" A hint of a smile spread across Alger's face. He nodded slightly and said, "That's right." He had hidden hints for the follow-up plan during the tarot divination. In fact, in a situation where he had no skin in the matter and wasn't even noticed, there was no need to be so tactful. He could have described things in detail directly, but Alger felt that he still needed to test out an adorer like the world. He wanted to know if he was smart enough, rather than relying on his strength. If their intelligence were on the same level, Alger felt that they could cooperate more in the future. There was no need to talk too much between smart people. On the contrary, he would try to not involve the world in his own affairs. He would only ask for help when he needed a helper, unless Mr. Fool had other orders. Now, the world's response and previous performances had confirmed that he was sly, vicious, and experienced. I'm a tarot card expert. On such matters, Mr. Hanged Man, you're just a rookie. Klein secretly laughed, belittling him inwardly. The message hidden in the Hanged Man's interpretation was very simple. The Hierophant meant that he wanted to inform the Church of Storms about Blazing Danitz and Steel Mavedi, and then use the power of the mandated punishers to divide the enemy and reap the benefits. This was something Klein often used, so there was no difficulty in understanding. The Moon and the Sun cards which followed were a reminder and warning from the Hanged Man. Since the mandated punishers were involved, a certain amount of caution had to be taken. According to Alger's experience, his colleagues in Biome would definitely use a sealed artifact that could force many people within its range to fall into a dream when dealing with similar issues. Mavedi's characteristic meant that there had to be a specific item in the Sun domain which targeted him. I'm immune to dreams, so I'm not afraid of the sun. Klein reached out his hand and half-turned the inverted the world card, turning it into its proper position, meaning that this plan was feasible and that he would make preparations. Alger raised his head and took a deep breath. The master here specializes in aromatherapy. She can use the fragrances of different essential oils, extract, incense, and flower essence to treat corresponding emotional problems and pacify the restless mind. Do you want to try it? Using the contact point at Amiris Avenue. Klein smiled in response. Okay. The two of them looked at each other as they remained motionless. They stopped talking about the aromatherapy anymore as both of them already had everything laid out. Klein didn't stay any longer than necessary. He took out his pocket watch, looked at it, and slowly stood up. Alger wiped away his smile, pressed his hand to his chest, and slightly bowed. Let us praise God. All divination outcomes come from His revelation. Oh, you even know how to express your loyalty. Klein tried to hold back his laughter as he replied seriously, imitating Alger, let us praise God. He took 2 steps away, then suddenly stopped and looked back at Alger, chuckling as he put on his hat. Frankly, you aren't suitable for that type of attire. Ah. Alger couldn't keep up with Mr. World's train of thought. When Klein had left the themed coffee shop, Alger retracted his gaze and looked at the mirror in the corner and took a good look at himself. Initially, he didn't think there was anything wrong wearing that. However, after the World's remark, he found it more inconsistent the more he looked at himself. Finally, he understood why he had said that. A fellow, who looked boorish and hardened, one appearing capable of summoning 100 sailors at any time to beat up his opponent or bringing out an axe and chopping them into pieces, really shouldn't be wearing such a mysterious classical warlock robe. It made his bearing somewhat abnormal. Cathedral of Waves. Alger, who had changed back into his original clothes, kept a low profile and followed the worshippers into the hall. He took advantage of the act of making a confession in order to meet the bishop, Chogo, through the priest in charge. After saluting, he went straight to the point. I met Blazing Danitz, who claims that the key that Vice Admiral Iceberg possesses has nothing to do with Death's treasure and that they are even willing to sell it. He entrusted me with a mission to take note of Steel Mavedi's whereabouts. Apparently, he was injured by this second mate of the Admiral of Blood, and is in a rush to escape from his pursuit. Your Excellency, I wish to leak this news, making Steel Mavedi and his subordinates successful in cornering Blazing Danitz. And I wish to use this opportunity to capture them all or execute them on the spot. This will be able to effectively keep the arrogance of the pirates in check. Chogo revealed a look of approbation. Very good. The way you do things is better than I expected. Alger replied with a look of humility, this all stems from the Lord's guidance, and also from your teachings. In the evening, I'll find a suitable target to leak this news to. If I come to pray again, it will indicate that Steel Mavedi temporarily isn't taking action. If I do not appear, it means that I might be restrained by him or his subordinates to prevent any news from leaking. This means that they have fallen for the trap. After giving details of the location and other matters, Alger returned to the confessional and left as usual. 7:15 p.m. Amiris Leaf Bar. Alger, wearing a pair of baggy pants and a head towel wrapped around his dark blue hair, stood by a boxing ring and held a glass of Lanty Proof in his hand. With a mocking expression on his face, he looked at the two contestants with bruises all over. Soon, he noticed his target had entered the room and was heading straight for the bar counter. After a while, he sat down next to the thin man and said with a chuckle, I heard that Steel has arrived in Byam. The man tilted his head in alarm and replied with a fake smile, why don't I know about it? Is that so? It looks like Blazing fooled me. Alger smacked the bar counter and drank a mouthful of alcohol. Blazing. Danitz, the man's eyes lit up as he asked hesitantly. Yes, that's him. Alger gritted his teeth. I met him this morning at the Gold Coin Casino. This damned fellow claimed that Steel was in Byam. Pooey. How dare he lie to me? The swarthy, thin man's eyes darted around without interrupting. He finished listening quietly, stood up, and chuckled. I forgot that I have something to do. We should have a game of cards another time. He patted Alger on the shoulder and in a seemingly unhurried manner, left the bar in a hurry. Alger held a glass of alcohol, half turning to look at his back. His eyes appeared deep and gloomy, and there were no signs of a smile at the corners of his mouth. Chapter 525, the calm squall. Looking up at the wall clock and seeing that it was past 8 o'clock, Alger put down his glass mug of alcohol and pushed his way through the drunkards into the street. As the Rørsted archipelago was rich in coal, Byam was like the mainland cities of Backlund and Pritz Harbor. Its streets were lined with tall black lamp posts, and the light of the burning gas effused through the metal grille, illuminating the relatively clean streets. Alger pulled off his headscarf and slowly turned into a side alley. At a dead end in the alley, he could smell the scent of urine mixed with alcohol. Although the Amiris Leaf Bar had a bathroom, it clearly wasn't enough for the customers during peak periods. Some of the drunks who couldn't hold it in could only find a secluded place to relieve themselves. The red moonlight penetrated the clouds and shone into the alley. While Alger was still considering whether he should put on a more convincing act, a firm and pervading voice came from behind him. Did you purposely leak the information about Blazing to us? He's not stupid. Alger muttered to himself as he slowly turned around, as though preparing for a surprise attack. 7 or 8 steps away, he saw a figure leaning against the wall. The figure was about 1.78 meters in height, and it wore a boat-shaped hat. Its face was thin and sharp, and it wore a look of aggression. He had a lock of black hair hanging down, half obscuring the dark green eyes on his left side, which softened his own coldness. Even though there was often quite a difference between a wanted poster and the person in question, many famous pirates didn't even don disguises as they wandered the city. As an insider of the church, Alger had seen many almost photographic portraits drawn with rituals and had participated in pirate conventions. He was still able to successfully link the person in front of him to a name on the bounty notices. He didn't express this point and deliberately hesitated before asking, calm squall? He was the chief helper of Steel Mavedi, a beyonder who was good at controlling his emotions and thinking calmly, but he was also inhumane and had a 1,500 pounds reward offered for him. The man pulled at his black windbreaker and revealed an empty smile. Can I deny that? Well, probably not, just like how you can't deny that you deliberately mentioned Blazing to Amaru. He's not someone who enjoys using his brain, the complete opposite of me. I've never thought of lying. I only wish to obtain some payment for the news you received from me. Between Blazing, who's alone, and Steele, who has so many helpers, anyone with a brain would know which to choose. Of course, I wish that you keep it a secret. I don't want to be pursued by Vice Admiral Iceberg, Alger replied frankly. Squall nodded his head leisurely and said, tell me the specifics. Just like I mentioned before. I bumped into and recognized Blazing at the Gold Coin Casino. He entrusted me to take note of Steele's whereabouts. Haha, it seems like he wishes to launch a counterattack, Alger said with a scoff. We agreed upon a point of contact. I believe this is intelligence worth at least 1,000 pounds. 1,000 pounds? Look up at the crimson moon. Are you dreaming? Squall scoffed. This might be a trap. Don't you understand that? Blazing might very well have found helpers, which is why he dares to seek us out. It's not for me to judge whether it's a trap or not. 500 pounds. Less than that, and I'd rather pretend that nothing has happened. Alger attempted to argue on the basis of reason for the reward. 300 pounds. You have to follow me somewhere and stay there for some time. It's to prevent you from selling this piece of news to others and spoiling our plans. We'll pay you when we capture Blazing with the intelligence you provided or have his spirit channeled. Don't worry. Food, alcohol, and a bed will all be free. Regardless, you lucked out. If there are any accidents that had resulted from you, hee. I believe you'll know the outcome, Squall suggested with a tone which didn't allow for refusal. Sure enough, just as I expected, with my background being unknown, and with me not being too dangerous, the possibility of them choosing temporary detention is much higher than silencing me. However, I've also made preparations for a worst-case scenario. As long as I'm not too careless, escaping isn't a problem. Alger deliberately acted like he was in a dilemma as he said, no more than 2 days, or my crew will leave with my ship. I'll inform them if it exceeds 2 days. At some point in time, a sharp scalpel had appeared in Squall's palm, and he was making it jump and spin like an acrobat. After Alger described in detail the point of contact at 15 Amiris Avenue and the corresponding communication methods, Squall didn't speak further. He turned around and led Alger as they turned at every corner, and they arrived at an unknown street before entering a nondescript house. Long time no see, blue-haired captain of a ghost ship. The door was opened by an old man with hair that had more white than black. He was dressed as a local and wore a pair of baggy pantaloons. Old Quinn. You really are the intelligence officer of the Admiral of Blood, Alger deliberately said in astonishment. Old Quinn chuckled and said, there's always some truth to rumors. What you imagine to be fake might very well be real. He didn't switch on the gas wall light, but he carried a silver candle lamp in his hand as he guided Alger and Squall through the dark hall into a spacious, windowless basement. You'll stay here for a while. My friends and I will be in charge of watching you and also provide you with alcohol and food, Old Quinn said with a laugh. To show our sincerity, we're not going to disarm you. All right. Alger took the initiative to walk to the low bed in the basement. Old Quinn closed the heavy stone door and locked it behind him. Squall didn't linger on, but hurried away, checking repeatedly to see if he was being followed. After changing to a rental carriage, he came to a lone enclave in Byam. It was also the residential area of the upper class. As he entered a garden bungalow, Squall saw Mavedi sitting on a sofa in the living room, waiting for him. The others were either lying, standing, or sitting in a semicircle, with puppets and zombies acting as guards around them. Steele's lips were thick, his skin swarthy. His hair was curled up like steel balls often seen in factories. Is the intel reliable? The muscles on his arms trembled, exuding vibes of tremendous strength. However, his entire being emanated a cold and sinister feeling, as if he wasn't a living creature. Squall nodded. He's a pirate captain who serves money. I've already detained him at Old Quinn's place. If there really is a problem, he definitely won't be able to leave that place alive. I think he knows this very well. At this point, Squall revealed a cold smile. However, we still have to be wary of any accidents. This might be a trap set up by Blazing. Do you have any ideas? Mavedi asked directly. The first thing he saw was a pirate lying on a couch. He was wearing a brown local tunic and twirling a yellowish-brown straw hat with his fingers. This was Mavedi's deputy of this round of operations. He was the captain of the 6th ship which was lost in the battle with Vice Admiral Dusk, Blood Brambles, Hendry. He had a bounty of 3,800 pounds. It's clear that Squall has a plan. Hendry used his straw hat to cover his pale face. Squall chuckled and said, "Didn't that adventurer, John Smith, send Mordor to join us undercover? Let's deliberately leak the news to him, making him think that we're still waiting for help and that we can only take action the day after tomorrow or 3 days later. Those bunch of greedy adventurers definitely wouldn't let Blazing off. They'll definitely fall over themselves for him. When the time comes, we can find a spot to watch the show. If there are any accidents, they'll be the ones bearing the brunt of things. If everything is successful, we can also cull them." "All right." Steel Mavedi's eyeballs slightly moved, radiating intense bloodthirst. In the early hours of the morning, everything was ready. Blood Brambles Hendry brought a leather suitcase over, took out a peacock blue carpet, and slowly spread it out in front of him. There were many mysterious patterns on it that had a non-human flavor to it. Mavedi, Squall, and 2 other Beyonders, as well as 8 zombies and puppets, took their places on it. Hendry was the last to step in. Closing his eyes halfway, he recited a single word in Elvish, "Flight." The peacock blue carpet tightened suddenly and floated upwards, lifting everyone up from the ground and into the air as they flew towards Amiris Avenue. During this process, Hendry pulled out a black handkerchief and shook his wrist, turning it into the night sky which magically covered all their traces under the moonlight. In about 7 to 8 minutes, they arrived in the area around 20 Amiris Avenue. Diagonally across them was the targeted house. They didn't move forward. Instead, they let the flying carpet hover silently in front of the crown of a thick tree as they lay prone to observe the situation. Time passed, second by second, as Hendry steadied the mystical item. There were no signs of a lack of spirituality. The night slowly passed, and the horizon was suffused with a faint red glow. The sun was about to rise, and the gang of pirates led by Steel Mavedi began their preparations to find another suitable spot for daytime surveillance. At this moment, a figure nimbly moved across the rooftops with his back bent, arriving above 15 Amiris Avenue. He wore a black cloak, his eyebrows yellow, and eyes dark blue. His facial features and contours were relatively soft. It was none other than Blazing Danitz. Danitz looked around cautiously for a moment, then climbed up the raised chimney, pushed his hand through it, and slid down. "He's really here." Steel Mavedi, Blood Brambles Hendry, Squall, and company felt their spirits lift at the same time. At this moment, several figures sprang up from the chimneys and periphery of Units 13, 14, and 17. They rushed over with fast and potent stances, either breaking the windows, kicking open the doors, or using the chimney to rush into Unit 15 from different positions. Chapter 526, Dream of Eternity. The Rorstad Archipelago was the lone kingdom's governing branch in the central areas of the Sonia Sea. Similarly, it was a key diocese of the Church of Storms. It had a high-ranking deacon, who was part of the Council of Cardinals, permanently stationed here. Of course, even a pirate at the level of admiral might not be able to stir such a powerful figure into action, much less when it dealt with a second mate and bosun. As a result, it was left to Deacon Cordoba Roy, who happily accepted the order and led 2 mandated Punisher teams to activate sealed artifacts 2-37 and 2-166. They lay in ambush at a distance from 15 Amiris Avenue in order to be absolutely safe. From Cordoba Roy's perspective, a team of mandated punishers with 2 sealed artifacts was enough to deal with the group of pirates consisting of Steel and Blazing Danets, but the latter's intention of keeping an eye of his pursuers' whereabouts caused him to worry. Instinctively, he felt that there was a problem, so he called for an additional team of mandated punishers. Actually, just having 2 to 37 is sufficient. While they waited, Cordoba suddenly sighed. In his opinion, this sealed artifact would be the nightmare of Steel, Blazing, and Company. He closed his eyes and the corresponding information appeared in his mind. Number 37. Name, Dream of Eternity. Danger grade, 2, dangerous. It has to be used with care and moderation. It can only be applied for operations that require 3 or more people, a deacon, or diocese bishop. Security classification, bishop, team captain, and above. Sealing method, place in boiling water. Description, it has the appearance of a heart. It's black in color, feels ice cold to the touch, and is filled with holes, often making a sound like a flute. This item originates from a primitive tribe in West Balam of the southern continent. They have spirit warlocks as their leaders and are nocturnal. A lone army company conquered the tribe, received the object they revered on the altar, and in the week that followed, there were cases of soldiers acting abnormally, going mad, committing suicide, and so on. Research shows that as long as one comes into contact with this item, they will enter a long dream. If not woken up by someone else, one will forever remain in that illusory world. On the surface, they would appear frustrated, fearful, and confused. One's mental and biological states will gradually change. The researchers who were awakened were still unable to tell the difference between reality and dreams for a long time, which led to a series of tragic events, including, but not limited to, expressing love to their superiors, kissing the mouth of a venomous snake, suffering from depression, undressing and running naked, and attempting to bathe in boiling water. If they weren't transferred to another city, the only possible outcomes would be madness and suicide. This item can be used, causing all creatures within the target's surroundings to fall into the same dream. The user can choose the target to a certain extent and excluded companions. The effective radius is a maximum of 50 meters. Beyond that would burden the user tremendously, dealing severe mental damage. The user will enter a state of being unable to distinguish reality from dreams after the matter, and will have to leave the city where 2 to 37 is located for any chance of recovery. Many examples, see appendix, show that even without contact, this item can affect the surrounding population greatly unless it's placed in boiling water. Appendix 1. It is similar to the effects of a nightmare from the Evernight pathway, but it's more prominent and uncontrollable. 2. Example 1, a keeper once forgot to add charcoal, causing the fire to go out and the temperature of the boiling water to drop. He soon had an abnormal reaction, and he was suspected to be dreaming of a beloved girl of his. He began to make a passionate confession to his glove, and tried to engage in relation beyond that of friendship with it. Example 2, as his thoughts churned, Cordoba suddenly saw Blazing Danets, the Golden Dream's 4th bosun, come to this point of contact to collect information. He gestured with his hand, signaling the mandated punishers to open the golden box engraved with numerous symbols and magic labels before taking out sealed artifact 2 to 37 which was soaked in boiling water. The golden box contained another sealed artifact, 2 to 166. It could maintain the original temperatures of the objects inside, and to a certain extent, it could change the weather, producing sun-holy water rain. Of course, it also had very negative effects, otherwise, the mandated punishers would have long used it to seal 2 to 37 instead of using it as a temporary trick. The most unacceptable negative effect was that no matter what object remained in prolonged contact with it, it would become infected with the characteristics of life, and it would also piously believe in the eternal blazing Sunday. Within the mandated punishers, a table had already appeared that sang praises of the eternal blazing sun every day, and there was a candle that wished to light itself every second to purify everything. In response, the irascible mandated punishers had turned the table into a pile of firewood, and they had lit it using the aforementioned candle. Seeing figures appear one by one and dashing towards 15 Amiris Avenue, Cordoba Roy didn't hesitate to press his right hand down, ordering the team member beside him to activate sealed artifact 2-37. An illusory fish scale immediately appeared on the surface of that member's palm, and he directly grabbed the sealed artifact that resembled a pitch-black heart, out of the boiling water. The melodious sound of a flute rang out, and dense darkness enveloped the house at 15 Amiris Avenue. The scene before adventurer John Smith remained the same. It was still the bare, unfurnished living room and the black-cloaked blazing Danitz. He didn't appear like he was in a dream. They ran over with all their might, fired, and used their own abilities to successfully injure Blazing and capture the famous pirate who had a bounty of £3,000 and was involved with the key to death. However, in the real world, they were sitting with their legs up, or swimming with their arms outstretched, or using their fingers as guns, with their mouths making shooting sounds. Move out. Cordoba Roy left his hiding place and rushed to the house at 15 Amiris Avenue. The other mandated Punisher team members were divided into two groups and began encircling the house from different positions. Before Cordoba arrived, the living room was already brightly lit, as if the sun was rising. Holy pure water dripped down like rain. It none other than sealed artifact 2-166 being put to use. At a distance away, the flying carpet floated silently in the darkness. As soon as Steel Mavedi and the others saw the mandated Punishers appear, they immediately understood that this was indeed a trap set by Blazing Danitz. This son of a bitch, he actually defected to the Church of Storms. Mavedi growled as mania flashed in his eyes. Blood Brambles Hendry looked at calm Squall and sincerely praised him. Fortunately, we weren't careless. In fact, I didn't expect a foolish donkey like Blazing Danitz to cooperate with the Church of Storms, Squall said calmly. Perhaps, the injured him was already captured by the mandated Punishers, and he had no choice but to cooperate with them. Just as they were about to leave, they saw something protruding from the shadows outside the house at 15 Amiris Avenue. Something was sticking to the ground and quickly moving away. Blazing. Steel Mavedi recalled the scenes of his failed ambush. Danitz. Hendry also recognized the man who had tried to escape with his magical powers. Squall was taken aback for a moment before coming to a realization. Either Blazing Danitz wishes to use this opportunity to escape the mandated Punisher's control, or he has other traps to use against us. However, for some reason, the mandated Punishers were attracted, so he had no choice but to give up and flee. Regardless, this is an opportunity. Blood Brambles Hendry glanced at the mandated Punishers who had stormed the house. As long as we seize this minute, we'll be able to kill and take away Blazing under the noses of the mandated Punishers. Steel Mavedi's hopes were momentarily raised as his eyes revealed an abnormal look of mania. After Squall nodded, he said to the other two Beyonders, "Take my zombies and puppets and guard this position. Once the mandated Punishers are here, use them to create chaos and take the opportunity to escape." "Yes, boss." The two Beyonder pirates jumped off the flying carpet at the same time with the zombies and puppets. The peacock blue carpet made a turn and shot ahead of Blazing. "Provide us support. Mainly be on guard against the surroundings. I'm worried that Danitz has other helpers." Squall seized the moment and said to the Blood Brambles Hendry. A smile appeared on Hendry's pale face. "All right." Without saying anything else, Squall nodded at Steel Mavedi. Relying on his advantage from being high in the sky, Mavedi was able to distinguish the mostly normal shadows, determining the direction of the target. He suddenly jumped off the flying carpet and landed heavily on the ground like a giant boulder. White frost condensed under his feet as a layer of cold and transparent ice quickly spread to the side. The black shadow was immediately frozen in the corner. With a crack, Blazing Danitz struggled to break free, growing out of the shadows. On the flying carpet, Hendry showed their good teamwork by dropping what he had long held in his hand. They were green leaves, flowers, and brambles. The leaves, petals, and brambles wildly grew in size or joined together, ensnaring Blazing Danitz, making him immobile. Squall took the opportunity to jump off the flying carpet and thrust a sharp scalpel in his right palm towards Danet's neck. Splat! He held onto the handle of the scalpel with his right hand and circled around to the back of the target. Danet's head fell off and his body quickly shrank, turning into a thin, tattered paper figurine. At the same time, Steel Mavedi felt an indescribable sense of hunger bearing down on him. It was like a terrifying monster hidden in the darkness, quietly watching him. No, it's not blazing. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, an extremely compressed, incandescent fireball flew over from one of the rooftops, smashing towards his body. Steel Mavedi only made one movement, and that was to raise his arm in front of his body. Boom! The flames exploded and a shockwave radiated in all directions, blocking Squall's and Hendry's line of sight. However, they weren't flustered at all, as they had the utmost confidence in Steel. Sure enough, Mavedi only suffered from having his clothes torn and his skin covered in white marks. Apart from that, he hadn't suffered any injuries at all. But at that moment, he suddenly saw a figure walking out of the roiling flames in the sky. It was clearly a black cloak belonging to Blazing Danet's, but it had neatly combed black hair, dark, emotionless eyes, and a thin, cold face. The Danets from before had always been faceless Klein, Gehrman Sparrow, who had always been prepared for the hunt. Chapter 527, A quick battle. Just as he leaped out of the flames, the 2 points of light in the eyes of Klein, who wore golden gloves on his left hand, enlarged in size and changed from dark to bright, as if they were lightning that suddenly cut across the sky. After distracting Steel Mavedi and company's attention with paper figurine substitutes, he had activated Creeping Hunger and switched to the interrogator's soul. He planned on using the psychic piercing Beyonder power. Ah! Steel Mavedi suddenly cried out miserably. It was as if someone had stabbed a knife into his head, stirring his grayish-white brain. A feeling of pain came from the depths of his soul, instantly occupying his mind. At the same time, his Beyonder powers erupted from the irritation and turned into a hurricane that spread out in all directions. Suddenly, beautiful snowflakes began to fall from the sky. Layers of translucent ice began spreading outwards, and the trees on both sides of the road were covered with white edges. They withered quickly, revealing traces of decay. The lingering resentment of the remnant spirits was successively awakened. They sobbed, wailed, and shrieked, causing the nearby area to be dyed with a gray and repressed color. Klein naturally descended from the sky, his left glove shining like the sun. He opened his arms and leaned back as if embracing something. Just as his heels touched the cold ground, a pure, blazing, thick pillar of light descended from above. This holy radiance enveloped Steel Mavedi, illuminating his dark skin, firm muscles, and steel ball-like curly hair. Priest of light, light of holiness. Without a sound, Mavedi's expression became even more twisted, and his skin began to show signs of melting. At this moment, he was like a candle that had been thrown into a burning fireplace. Compared to the corrupted Bishop Millet, as a zombie, he was weaker towards such attacks. The damage he took was even more serious. The snowflakes stopped falling, and the ice on the ground quickly melted. The trees that had white edges revealed their brown colors. There was no doubt that the powerful beam of light had caught the attention of Blood Brambles Hendry and Squall. The former's expression changed as he reached into his secret pocket and pulled out materials casting magic. He planned to use his terrain advantage to save Steel Mavedi. At this moment, a raven made purely out of flames suddenly appeared before his eyes. 1, 2, 3. Countless fire ravens filled Hendry's field of vision like crimson stars. They flew over from all directions, flapping their wings in a dense, scorching hot formation. Hendry's heart skipped a beat as his gaze seemed to freeze. He immediately moved his hand elsewhere to grab another type of material. Whoosh! He scattered light blue powder on his body while he chanted in ancient Hermes, "Sea waves." The powder suddenly expanded and turned into dark blue waves that spread out in all directions. When they met the fire ravens, they made sizzling sounds and created a large amount of white fog. The fire wave from the previous explosion had subsided a little. Through the remnants of the crimson light, Squall saw that Steel Mavati's skin was melting like wax and his flesh melted inch by inch. He saw the unfamiliar man in a black cloak standing next to him. He didn't panic. Like a cold-blooded viper who had lost its emotions, he calmly raised his arms and abruptly pressed both his palms down. In a split second, he saw the thin, grim-faced young man's body sink. His movements had turned slow, as though the wings he used for flying had been snapped. As for Steel Mavati, he began to struggle and roll in order to avoid a second round of Light of Holiness. Immediately following that, Squall noticed that the man had lost his weight and thickness. Once again, he turned into a thin paper figurine, pressed to the ground by an invisible force before soaking into the mud that came as a result of the melting ice. Klein phased into existence from another position. He rubbed his right thumb and middle finger together and snapped his fingers 3 times as he rushed forward. Pa! 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 The sunbird-shaped dark golden brooch in front of him flashed continuously as it added a purifying element to his air bullets. Bang! 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 The 3 bullets connected at an extremely fast speed and hit the slow-moving Steel Mavati in his right chest, penetrating his half-melted skin and flesh, creating an exaggerated, gruesome wound. Golden flames spread in all directions. So. Squall tossed out scalpels after scalpels, but they were all dodged by Klein's deft, acrobatic maneuvers. At that moment, Steel Mavati had gotten a breather. With a push of his palm, he stood up once again and charged straight at the enemy, fully displaying his advantage in close combat, as well as his abnormally strong body that could withstand powerful blows. Ice formed under his feet again, and his fists effused a rotting aura. Then, once again, he saw 2 bolts of lightning shoot out from Klein's dark brown eyes, shooting into his own. Steel Mavati subconsciously raised his head and clenched his teeth. His nose, mouth, and ears were all leaking blood, adding to his previously melted skin. While shooting the air bullets, Klein had changed the soul he used for grazing. It was still Interrogator, and it was still psychic piercing. Against a Beyonder like a zombie which had a body as tough as steel, dealing damage to the spirit body was far more effective. While the repeated strikes made Steel Mavati's body stiffen for short periods of time, he lost the shackles of his reasoning. Black, firm hair grew from his face, 1 strand at a time, while his teeth and nails also constantly grew longer. His skin squirmed in a bid to coalesce, turning from black to white. He was like a real, crazy zombie who was thirsting for blood. Klein took this opportunity to close in. He bent his body and brushed past Steel Mavati's shoulder. He then stuffed the item in his hand into the hideous wound that he had created into the man's body. It was a bottle with a few ordinary brass bullets, and inside it was a large amount of sun holy water that Klein had prepared in advance. Oof! Klein, who didn't stop, caused Squall's attempt to control him to fail again. With a twist of his heel, he moved behind Steel Mavati, his back to him. Pow! He raised his right hand and snapped his fingers before Steel Mavati could pull out the glass bottle. Bang! A light explosion rang out, and fiery crimson light soared, shattering the already fragile glass bottle. Large amounts of sun holy water inundated Steel Mavati's body. The infamous pirate with a bounty of 6,000 pounds froze where he stood, his throat letting out an anguished groan. He plopped to his knees, a dark green gas in his body was pouring out and disappearing into the air. At the sight of this, Squall's eyes darkened. He immediately took out an iron-black charm and muttered a word in ancient Hermes, shriek. The charm suddenly cracked and vanished, completing the sacrifice. An invisible sound wave swept outwards like a tsunami, almost successively drilling into the ears of everyone around. Klein's mind buzzed, the tip of his nose cold. Blood oozed out, and Blood Brambles Hendry on the flying carpet was in an even more miserable state. His face was twisted, and his body convulsed as he fell down, unable to even let out a tragic scream. On the contrary, Blazing Danitz, who was far away on a rooftop, wasn't subject to any effects. He happily threw out another blob of a highly compressed incandescent fireball. The fireball landed on Hendry's body without any resistance and exploded with a loud boom. Flesh and blood splattered outwards. Flames wrapped around his fingers, calves, and head before he fell to the ground. The flying carpet then lost control and slowly settled down. Squall took the opportunity to turn around and run, not hesitating in the slightest. However, he was stunned to discover that the terrifying man, who had almost finished off Steel Mavedi within 10 seconds, didn't seem to show the slightest signs of being impeded. He had turned around and given chase. How is that possible? This a shriek charm created by Admiral. Squall had no time to think over the reasons. He ran as fast as he could down the other street. At that moment, his head was suddenly hit hard by someone. A tearing pain made his whole body spasm. The lightning in Klein's eyes faded as he raised his right hand and snapped his fingers once more. Bang! An air bullet crossed the distance of about 10 meters and accurately drilled into the back of Squall's head. Squall didn't have the non-human endurance that Steel had. His vision immediately blackened, and he slowly fell to the ground. Klein caught up with him in a few steps, reached out his left hand, and let the jubilant creeping hunger enjoy the meal. I have heard the voice of the true creator before, and I've experienced Mr. Door's call for help. I have great resistance in this aspect, and I can even quickly recover from the shrieking of a wraith, let alone a mere charm. Klein muttered silently to himself as he watched Squall's body be reduced to flesh and blood and plunge into the open mouth of creeping hunger. After a few seconds, creeping hunger came to a satisfied halt, and Klein quickly returned to Steel Mavedi's side. This zombie had been miserably purged. Although his head remained intact, he was already dead. Klein took a few steps forward, picked up the peacock blue flying carpet that had fallen to the ground, wrapped it around Steel's body, and lifted it. Glancing back at 15 Amiris Avenue, he listened to the commotion of rampaging zombies and puppets, and he sensed that the mandated punishers were approaching. Klein pulled his hood over his head, bowed slightly in that direction as a salute. "Pa!" Klein rubbed his fingers, and all of the paper fragments around him were set ablaze, producing crimson-red columns of fire. Under the light of the fire, his body turned illusory, and he vanished from where he stood, with the items turning into a shadow. As for the beyonder characteristics of Squall and Hendry, which were slowly coming into existence, he didn't take a look, nor did he pay any attention to them. Greed would cause him to fall into unnecessary danger. Besides, the harvest he had reaped now was already sufficient. After leaving some of the mandated punishers to deal with the rampaging zombies and puppets, the pirates who had been damaged by his companions, and the beyonder adventurers who were caught, Cordoba Roy led the rest of the team and rushed over. However, all they saw were scattered corpses, scalpels, and withered trees on the streets. They could distinguish the receding aura of the sun, as well as the evil sensation that came from the depths of flesh and blood. Chapter 528, Grazing. It was early in the morning, and the sky had just brightened up slightly. Most of the alleys were dark and quiet. With the aid of Danitz's cloak, Klein blended into the shadows and quickly moved about. He felt as if his surroundings were grayish-black and transparent, with reality being blurred. All sounds seemed to come from the depths of the starry sky, empty and distant. After staying as far away from Amiris Avenue as possible, he acquired his bearings and grew out from the shadows. He appeared in an empty alley filled with broken stones. Klein's hands shook, throwing Steel Mavedi's peacock blue flying carpet out in front of him. He wanted to finish the grazing before Mavedi's spirit body began dissipating. Throwing away the flying carpet, he took a step forward, stretched out his left hand, and extended his 5 fingers, aiming from above at the corpse that was still warm. Creeping hunger revealed its original appearance, a thin material that looked like it was made up of human skin. 2 eyes had split open in the middle of its palm. Its pupils were bright red, as though they were dyed in blood. Whoosh! A bone-chilling breeze suddenly blew through the alley. It swirled around Steel Mavadi's corpse, twisting into an almost transparent human figure. One could vaguely see thick lips and curled hair that resembled steel beads. Mavadi's spirit body wore an abnormally pained expression as he tried his best to resist the suction of the creeping hunger. As for the grayish-white and blackish-green dots of light, they were like a surging galaxy, quickly flying out from his body and merging into the transparent figure. No! Mavadi let out a soundless scream, already being too late to beg for mercy. All he could do was desperately slip into the human-skinned glove, becoming attached to an empty finger, and revealing his beyonder characteristic that connected with the environment to a certain extent. This connection determined what powers would be usable when grazing Steel Mavadi's soul. Perhaps it would be 1, 2, but no more than 3 powers. Klein had no choice over the number and details before they became fixed, as it was purely random. Creeping hunger quickly blanketed its paleness and finally returned to its former disguised state, a plain black glove. Klein closed his eyes and sensed the changes for a few seconds before letting out a profound sigh. This time, his luck wasn't bad, but it wasn't too good either. He had succeeded in acquiring 3 beyonder powers belonging to Steel Mavadi, but he didn't receive the body as hard as steel, the tenacious vitality of being impervious to gunfire, flames, or a certain degree of explosives. The first is the power of a zombie, which allows me to unleash a critical attack, making up for my previous flaws of only having a nimble combat style. The second is mastery over ice. Although it's impossible to condense an ice spear or create a blizzard like that of the Demoness pathway to inflict a direct attack, I can freeze the surrounding ground, lower the temperature of the air, and effectively affect the movement of my enemy. If there's any physical contact, then I can even freeze the enemy's body or stiffen his flesh and blood. It's a perfect match for my combat ability. The third is the manipulation of zombies. Haha. I no longer need to be afraid of not being able to have partners for a round of cards. Klein thought for a moment, then he bent down to inspect the items on Steel Mavadi's person. He quickly found 26 pounds, 11 soldi, and 8 pence in cash, as well as a collection of strange things that seemed normal, such as candles, clips, a thorny whip, and so on. Considering the fact that Steel Mavadi was a member of the Rose School of Thought and belonged to the type of people who indulged in their desires, Klein vaguely understood what was going on. Spitting on the ground, he only took the cash. Werewolf has supernatural healing powers. Zombie has a body like steel. There's really no need for him to carry any healing-related medicine or items. It's as Danitz concluded, Mavadi doesn't have any mystical items. That's right, mystical items are few in number to begin with. Many have clear flaws and negative effects. Not everyone can have one even if they want one. Previously, in the group consisting of a wraith, zombie, and werewolf, there were only 2 mystical items, Scarlet Lunar Corona and Biological Poison Bottle. Klein nodded and took out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded the yellowed piece of paper and placed it on the body of Steel Mavadi, covering his face. It was a bounty notice with a portrait of Mavadi and the corresponding bounty reward, 6,000 pounds. Klein straightened up, took a step back, stepped on the peacock blue carpet, and pulled out a paper figurine. Pa! With a swing of his arm, his wrist shook, and the paper figurine was thrown out. It burst into flames before scattering into ashes. Soon after, he phased into a shadow and disappeared into the alley along with the items. 2 or 3 minutes later, Cordoba Roy rushed over with a portion of the mandated Punisher team, just in time to see a cool breeze blow up the bounty notice, revealing Steel Mavadi's dissolving flesh and blood dissolving, his eyes wide open. Whoosh! The bounty notice fell to the side and remained facing up. Having lost track of their target, Cordoba and the others silently brought Steel's corpse back to the area where the battle had taken place. Glancing at the team members who were inspecting the site, the deacon, Cordoba, restrained his emotions and asked in a deep voice, a believer of the sun? This was the most important question for him and his diocese. The mandated Punisher team member responsible for finding clues via supernatural means to recreate the truth wasn't a Beyonder of the Storm pathway, but a Sequence 7 knowledge keeper corresponding to Reader, also known as Detective. He didn't rush to answer, but instead came over and squatted down to examine Mavadi's corpse. After a while, he looked up and said, "It's not a believer of the sun, probably a result of using the powers of a mystical item." "Reason?" Cordoba asked with a frown. The mandated Punisher said, "There's an evil feeling within that stems from flesh and blood. One of the corpses was devoured in such a manner, leaving only a body's traits and items. If it's a sun believer, they wouldn't do something like that even if they relied on items. To them, things in the domain of the true creator are sacrilegious and require immediate purification or sealing. They likely wouldn't borrow its powers." After thinking for a few seconds, Cordoba agreed with this conclusion and asked, "Someone from the Aurora Order?" "No, a real Rose Bishop or Shepherd wouldn't act so crudely. They'll definitely wrap the corpse within their body and deal with the scene after departing. There's no reason to dismember the body on the spot. It's a waste of time that also leaves a bunch of items that can be considered valuable. To devour him in such a rush, it resembles that of the negative effects of a mystical item," the knowledge keeper said calmly. "A mystical item that possesses powers in both the sun and secret suppliant domains? Perhaps it's something with powers like that of a shepherd? Berg, what's your take?" As a deacon, Cordoba had the clearance to know of a shepherd and their special abilities. As for the knowledge keeper knowing, it was a result of his position in the team. The other mandated Punishers had no idea what they were talking about. Knowledge keeper Berg stood up. "It's all possible. Any suspects?" Cordoba asked in a low voice. Berg shook his head. "There are no suspects for the time being. But one thing can be confirmed. Blood Brambles was killed by blazing Danets. The other person is his helper, a rather terrifying powerhouse that's not weaker than a pirate admiral." A terrifying powerhouse. Cordoba's expression turned grave as he muttered under his breath. Following that, his eyes lit up. "Could it be Edwina? She can simulate some Beyonder powers which she has seen before." Knowledge keeper Berg pondered for a moment and then said, "We can't rule out that possibility, but our intelligence shows that she was in the vicinity of Sonia Island a few days ago. Unless she can simulate a corresponding ability and use the spirit world to travel here." Cordoba paced back and forth, looked around, and said, "Deal with the scene, and don't bring this to the attention of the nearby residents. I'll submit the mission report, and let's hope that we'll receive more effective information." This involved a powerhouse whose combat prowess was equivalent to at least a Sequence 5. He could only restrain his irascible mood and make the most rational decision. Inside Old Quinn's house, in the basement with the heavy stone door sealed shut, Alger was sitting on the low bed, quietly looking at the candles on the table when his vision blurred. He saw the gray fog emanate, along with the fool sitting on a high chair, overlooking everything. A blurry silhouette appeared below, hands clasped before his face as he said in a pious tone, "Honorable Mr. Fool, the matter has come to a successful conclusion." The matter has come to a successful conclusion. This involves Steel Mavadi and several other Beyonders. The world sure is efficient at handling matters. His strength is stronger than I expected. As expected of an adorer of Mr. Fool. He might be able to sell another Beyonder characteristic at the Tarot Club, maybe even more than one. How did he get around the effects of sealed artifact 2-37? The uniqueness of a god's adorer? A thought flashed through Alger's mind, and he instinctively thanked Mr. Fool. Then, he took out a small metal bottle and smeared mint extract on the tip of his nose. A strong, irritating odor seeped into his head, instantly making Alger become abnormally clear-headed. At some point in time, a white gauze mask appeared in his hands, and he had poured the full moon essence oil onto it. After methodically putting on his mask, Alger stood up and walked slowly to the heavy stone door. With a staid series of movements, he retrieved a sealed metal jar from the inside of his clothes, twisted the mechanical switch, and pulled out a tube. Then, he stuffed the tube into the crevice of the stone door and extended it out. Without a sound, the gas inside the metal container started to emanate. This was the sanguine anesthetic gas provided by the moon, Emlyn. It can knock out strong commoners, sequence 9 beyonders with strong bodies, and even higher sequences who were lacking in their constitution. Even if old Quinn can resist the gas, he would still be significantly affected. As for his helpers and friends, Alger leaned against the stone door and waited patiently. When nearly a third of the gas was dispersed from the jar, he pulled the tube back and closed the switch. He turned around and listened attentively before receiving a satisfactory answer. Alger revealed a faint smile. He rapidly converged his aura and compressed it inside him. Suddenly, the muscles on his body bulged, and he threw a punch forward. Raging blow. Bang! The iron lock of the heavy stone door directly shattered, and the door itself opened up. Alger withdrew his fist and walked out, leaving only the sleeping figures outside. Author's note: creeping hunger has two modes, grazing and devouring. The former targets the soul and beyonder characteristic, while the latter targets the flesh and blood. Chapter 529, Tacitness 48 Acid Lemon Street, outside the Wind of Azure Inn. Dressed in a thick jacket and pantaloons, Blazing Danitz returned by taking a detour. He clung to the corner of a wall, remaining motionless for a long time. He was hesitating on whether to take the opportunity to run away and not face the terrifying madman, Gairman Sparrow, again. Unlike the battle at Bansi Harbor, he was hiding on a rooftop far away this time. It allowed him to take in the entire battle zone. Therefore, while supporting Gairman Sparrow and battling Blood Brambles Hendry, he finally saw the combat process of the crazy adventurer, finally grasping his beyonder powers and traits. Paper figurine substitutes, phasing out from flames, psychic blasts, a holy beam from the sun domain, shooting out air bullets with his finger, the ability to disguise himself into another person, as well as a glove that changes its appearance several times, and devoured squall. His powers far exceed my imagination, and there are a few that can't be compatible with each other. This isn't something that can be explained simply with the addition of one or two miraculous items to a sequence. Also, the sense of hunger that came from the depths of his soul explains something. That glove from the Vice Admiral Hurricane, creeping hunger. Captain had specifically reminded us that the glove can use the souls of many beyonders for grazing and thus use their powers. Danitz went through the thoughts he previously had and came to a final judgment. Gairman Sparrow is the current owner of Creeping Hunger. He didn't feel any sense of belittlement simply because Gairman had relied on a powerful mystical item to display such terrifying strength. Instead, he felt even more reverence for him. The reason for this was just one: a large part of using a mystical item to its fullest had to do with one's abilities. Without sufficient strength and extraordinary combat experience, even with Creeping Hunger, Gairman Sparrow wouldn't have been able to finish off Steel Mavedi and Calm Squall within 10 seconds. 2. His captain, Vice Admiral Edwina Edwards, learned from secret sources that Vice Admiral Hurricane didn't die at the hands of the Church of Storms, but instead, he was quickly killed by a particular powerhouse while fleeing. Danitz had no lack of understanding regarding the power of Vice Admiral Hurricane, Kalangos, back when he was at his peak. He knew that the standing of a powerhouse which could easily finish him off was equal to that of the top pirate powers. Furthermore, it would be two of the most powerful and terrifying ones, the King of the Five Seas and Queen Mystic. Although there's the factor of surprise, it would just lower the evaluation by a little. The person wouldn't be much weaker than the King of Immortality, and they'll be stronger than Admiral Hell and Admiral of Blood. Creeping Hunger now belongs to Gairman Sparrow. This means that he's either the one who killed Kalangos, or there's a power figure at the level of the Four Kings backing him up. No matter which possibility it is, it's all the more terrifying than I had originally expected. Danitz's body tensed up. He really didn't want to face the adventurer who had crazy blood flowing in him. Phew. He heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that he had been hesitating here for too long and that he had to make a decision as soon as possible. Gehrman Sparrow knows how to divine, and he's rather confident in his abilities in this domain. With my shadow cloak in his hands, escaping won't only fail, but it would also end up infuriating him. Shadow cloak is a rare mystical item. Clenching his teeth, Danitz turned the corner and went through the door of the hotel, all the way to the luxurious suite. After a few seconds of careful waiting and observation, Danitz took out his key and opened the door. He saw that the room was dark, that the gas wall lights hadn't been lit, and that the not very bright light of the early morning was shining through the window and onto Gehrman Sparrow, who was facing the door. The adventurer had changed back into his usual tweed black overcoat with dark trousers. He held a half-top hat in his hand, and his right foot was raised over his left thigh. He leaned back a little, his face obscured since his back was to the window. Only his dark brown eyes, which were exceptionally clear, watched the door with indifference and calmness. Danitz unconsciously lowered his head, laughed dryly, and said, "In accordance with your instructions, I circled to a few news agencies and wrote the information that Blazing had killed Steele Mavedi, Blood Brambles Hendry, and Squall on pieces of paper and threw them in. Of course, I mentioned having a powerful helper in this piece of news. He's a mysterious, unknown, a top adventurer, and a veteran bounty hunter." Klein nodded, revealing a polite smile. "Very good." With a sigh of relief, Danitz looked around and saw the peacock blue carpet. He was stunned for a few seconds before asking in puzzlement, "What about the heads of Steele and Hendry?" Klein replied calmly, "Wasn't taken." "You didn't take them?" Danitz exclaimed in astonishment. "Then what about our bounty?" As long as they had the heads of Steele and Blood Brambles, he would be able to get the appropriate bounty through people with connections. Although this would cost them 15 to 30% of the money received, he couldn't claim the bounty himself as a pirate. This was the only way, as the military's and the church's use of bounty rewards to encourage pirates to kill each other didn't mean that they would turn a blind eye to a gift that came walking through the door. To Danitz's surprise, Gehrman Sparrow, whose eyes were crazed with the desire for money, had actually not taken the heads of Steele and Blood Brambles, which meant that he had automatically given up on the bounty. Klein didn't answer him and pointed to the flying carpet on the ground. "You had helped in this. You have two choices. One is £3,000 in cash, and the other is this flying carpet. You have 5 seconds to consider. Exceeding that time will be considered as forfeiting. £3,000 in cash or the flying carpet? This flying carpet seems to only have the ability of suspension and flight. Furthermore, its speed isn't too fast, and it's not too useful. No, at sea, to a beyonder not from the sailor pathway, such items are very precious. At the very least, there's no need to worry about the aftermath of a ship being sunk." Danitz was momentarily thrown into a dilemma. Then he heard Gehrman Sparrow's voice counting. 3, 2, Danitz's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly said, "Flying carpet." Klein nodded and said, "Okay." With the knowledge that Gehrman had great credibility, Danitz finally relaxed before asking with a grumbling mumble, "Why didn't you count 5 and 4? Wasn't it supposed to be 5 seconds?" Klein replied without changing his expression, "Counted inwardly." "Counted inwardly." Danitz took a deep breath and grimaced. Klein slowly stood up, flicked his wrist, threw the hat from his hand, and left it hanging firmly on the rack before walking to his bedroom. Cathedral of Waves. Alger, who entered in the name of coming for morning prayers, met the diocese bishop, Chogo, and explained everything that had happened last night. The only thing that had been modified was that the sanguine anesthesia gas had been turned into a slumber charm of the Church of Evernight. Chogo nodded in approval. To be able to go deep into the enemy's lair and bear the risk of death for the sake of your faith, such an act is worthy of praise. You are a true storm attendant. Last night, we captured 5 beyonders and killed 2 of them on the spot. As a result of this, Mavedi, Hendry, and Squall have also died. The heads of these 3 pirates will no longer appear, or they will be in our hands, so the government's bounty will be ours. The total receivable reward will exceed more than £10,000 in total, and you will receive the bulk of it, which is £6,000. Do not refuse. The Lord has told us that those who fight for their faith must not be reserved. Holy Lord of Storms. An excited Alger pounded his left chest with his fist. Although he and the world didn't agree on how to split the spoils of war, he believed that the two of them had come to a tacit understanding. For example, they were not to interfere with each other when hunting pirates. As the bounty needed to be laundered through the church, the two of them would split it equally. As for the bounty offered by countries and organizations such as Intis and FASAC, Alger didn't hold any expectations for them. This was because every time one exchanged for the bounty reward, one needed to hand over the corpse or head of the target. Therefore, only one entity could be chosen. Only those with a deep background and good relations with the various organizations and countries could receive all of them. £3,000 will belong to the world. If I were to lose £3,000 at once, it will raise suspicion. Yes, I'll have to find an opportunity to buy a mystical item. Such things are rare, so they're often overpriced, even more so when in times of great need. No one will doubt that I spent £5,000 on a purchase that's worth £3,000. If I sell the items obtained from Old Quinn, the ones he had received, the accounts would be squared. Alger quickly came up with a follow-up solution. Knowing that he had £3,000 waiting for him, Klein sat happily in the high-back chair of the fool and considered a serious question. That is, after grazing Steel Mavedi, he had to release a soul from creeping hunger as he promised. Their Beyonder powers are quite useful. It's quite a pity to release them before finding a replacement. Yes. Besides, I've already released that faceless. There doesn't seem to be a need to do it this time. Feelings of hesitation and reluctance to part had stirred in Klein's heart as he was thrown into a dilemma. He was unable to make a decision. After a long time, he leaned back and exhaled. I can't deceive myself. He shook his head and laughed, turning relaxed from making up his mind. He decided to keep his promise and release a soul. The faceless from before had been released early because he wanted to receive some corresponding information. It was already an equal exchange. Which one should I release? Miss Justice bought the materials for a psychiatrist potion and a mystical item worth $5,500. Even if she's rich, her financial situation should be tight, so it wouldn't be appropriate to sell the psychiatrist characteristic at this time. Yes, she still owes my adorer £2,000 and will repay the money in February or March. Klein rejected the idea and decided to release the nightmare. As a former Nighthawk, he always had an inclination and felt gratitude based on his impression and feelings towards Beyonders in this domain, therefore, it wasn't difficult to make a choice in these situations without having any other factors to consider. Calming himself down, Klein picked up the human-skinned glove that he had previously brought above the grey fog. He closed his eyes and began to sense the distorted souls. Without any hesitation, he released the nightmare. Chapter 530, chronicles the nightmare appeared by the side of the long bronze table. He was a man in his 30s with black hair and blue eyes, a long, thin face, and obvious nasolabial folds. He had a beard that wasn't too thick by his mouth and chin. As the pain and the distortion eased, he pressed his hand to his chest and gave a solemn bow. Compared to the faceless from before, the nightmare was obviously not as muddle-headed and weak after being released. It was unknown if the Evernight pathway's enhancement to one's soul was stronger than that of the Seer pathway, or if it was because the grazing process had only happened recently. Klein sighed silently and began asking via spirit channeling, "Why did you die at the hands of Kalengos?" The corner of the nightmare's mouth slightly curled up, revealing a bitter smile. "I'm a red glove from the Nighthawks. I was tracking down a bunch of ancient chronicles that originated from a Balam imperial tomb. We suspected that they were related to the reason for Death's passing. I found out that a part of it might have fallen into the hands of a particular tycoon, so I led 2 companions of mine and boarded the ship he was on. Unfortunately, we were attacked by Kalangos's fleet just as we were about to launch an investigation. What happened to your companions? Klein subconsciously asked. The nightmare said in a slightly pained tone, we originally had the opportunity to leave and even kill Kalangos through our skillful teamwork, but our ship sank, and we had to board a lifeboat instead. Everyone died. No, they were killed in the line of duty. May the goddess bless you. Klein drew a crimson moon inwardly. This made him more aware of the great difference between fighting at sea and fighting on land. Environmental factors were of critical importance. Beyonders not from the sailor pathway would be at a great disadvantage. If it wasn't because of the fact that the flying carpet had been huge, cumbersome, and slow, making him an easy target, Klein would have opted to keep it and give Dan its cash. Fortunately, I have the bladder of a murloc. I can find an artisan to create a mystical item that allows me to swim underwater. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to find an artisan. Most of them are from the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, and there aren't many unaffiliated ones, otherwise, mystical items wouldn't be this rare. If push comes to shove, I'll get Mr. Hanged Man to help. Klein looked at the nightmare who had been killed in the line of duty and said softly as he leaned back, "What's your name? What unfulfilled wishes do you have?" The figure of the nightmare was already slowly dissipating. When he heard Klein's question, he said with a smile, "My name is Davy Raymond. I lost my parents, wife, and siblings in a black magic incident, leaving me with only one daughter, Nilu. She was born in 1330 and is a very lovely girl. And I'm sorry to say that in order to investigate the truth over the black magic incident, I joined the Nighthawks and later became a Red Glove. I didn't manage to spend time with her, making her lose her father alongside her mother. Haha, I believe that the church will definitely give her my pension and secretly provide her a certain amount of help. I'm not worried about her life, but I only hope to see her enter the hall of marriage under the witness of the goddess, to have her own family and not be lonely anymore. It's already the year 1350. She may already have a marriage partner," Klein sighed wistfully and said. "Time flies," Davy Raymond muttered in response. "Tell her that all the culprits have been punished and that I died because of an accident. There's no need to hate anyone anymore. Tell her that Daddy loves her, and Daddy is very sorry." His figure became more and more transparent, and he was about to disappear. Klein closed his eyes and asked, "Where does she live? What's the name of the tycoon who collected Death's Chronicles?" "We live in Desi County's Conant City. It's a beautiful seaside city, with rich rubber plantations growing nearby. If she hasn't moved, then she'll be living at 67 Red Indus Street. The tycoon's name is Jimmy Necker. He should have fallen into the hands of Kalangos as well." Before Davy Raymond finished speaking, his figure had already completely disappeared, leaving only a deep black gem-like object on the surface of his glove. Klein quietly watched this scene, and after a few seconds, he raised his right hand and tapped 4 times clockwise on his chest. He then said in a deep voice, "If there's a chance, I will visit your daughter and see how she's doing." In the palace, which looked like a giant's residence, the fog was endless, without any undulations, and was eternally unchanging. Klein put away Davy Raymond's Beyonder characteristic, rubbed his forehead, and turned his attention back to Death's Chronicles. The Death pathway and the Evernight pathway can be switched at high sequences. There's nothing odd about the church sending personnel to investigate the corresponding chronicles. I wonder if Jimmy Necker is dead or not. I'll need to find out. If he has already perished in a tragic case, and the thing has fallen in Kalangos's hands, that will require me to investigate from the pirates' side. Kalangos's crew now belongs to Vice Admiral Ailment, Tracy. As it involves death, it might be able to help Mr. Azik. Klein decided to check it out in passing himself, and if he encountered any difficulties, he could write directly to the powerhouse. After clearing his mind, he quickly returned to the real world and used the ritual to summon Creeping Hunger back. After everything was done and seeing that it was already getting late, he gave up on the idea of trying to catch up on his sleep. He decided to summarize the experiences and lessons from last night's operation. The biggest lesson for Klein was that he had overestimated the patience of the mandated punishers. He had originally hoped that, even if there had been an accident in the beginning, the mandated punishers would have been able to restrain him and wait for the real target, the real protagonist, Steel Mavedi, to appear. When that happened, they would have definitely used the sealed artifact which can pull many people into a dream, restraining all the unaffiliated Beyonders who had involved themselves in the Blitz. As for me, due to my uniqueness, I would be able to detect that I'm asleep and be able to forcibly escape. Then, I could have dealt with Steel Mavedi and his helpers in a composed manner, completing an achievement of an instant kill, and also bring 2 corpses along with me. Yet, just as the incident happened, that bunch of irascible brothers stormed in. They didn't even leave any backup teams to watch out for any contingencies. At the very most, they would let the wielder of the sealed artifact stay beyond the periphery, with 1 or 2 guards. The more Klein thought, the more he was at a loss on whether to laugh or cry. If it wasn't because Steel mandated Punisher's group of pirates who were more cautious and had at least 2 Beyonders assigned, as well as all their puppets and zombies to stop the mandated Punishers that might have pursued them, Klein would likely have found himself in a situation of going 2 against 5. If that had happened, he would have chosen to give up and directly engage in a strategic shift. What made Klein most satisfied was that he had done a pretty good job of making specific preparations. This was the professional habit of a magician. Because he had long known from Miss Sharon and Merrick about the traits of the first 5 sequences of the mutant pathway, Klein was well aware that Steel Mavedi, who had gone through the lunatic phase, could use irrational factors to resist any Beyonder disruption and influence on his mind. He had very strong resistance in this aspect, therefore, he gave up the thought of using Psychiatrist's Dragon Might and Frenzy, as well as Nightmare, which was clearly weaker than the mandated Punisher's sealed artifact, and he instead focused on the Interrogator's Psychic Piercing and the Priest of Light's Purification powers. Psychic Piercing wasn't a Beyonder power that disrupted one's thoughts and affected one's soul, but a means to directly attack the spirit body. In essence, the other effect acted on one's body of heart and mind, and targeted the soul body. There was a clear difference between the two. If any part of that combo failed to chain in any way, Steel Mavedi would have been able to recover, making it impossible for me to kill him quickly. And in that environment, that would spell failure. Yes. I've also used the pathway's trait of losing themselves to their desires, making it easy to grasp their emotions. I believed that once they suffered a psychic attack, there would be a high chance of them counterattacking in madness, without any consideration of anything else. In fact, the safest way of dealing with a zombie is to set up matchsticks or have danets. I'll use Flaming Jump and Light of Holiness, kiting Mavedi. It'll make him want to battle but be completely unable to reach his opponent. He wouldn't escape even if he wanted to. Just send a fireball, and I'll catch up to him. Unfortunately, it's a waste of time, and the situation didn't allow for it. Klein sighed, took out his pocket watch, snapped it open, and checked the time. Seeing that it was almost 9 o'clock in the morning, he turned the handle of the door and walked out of the bedroom. At this moment, Danitz was lying in a reclining chair, producing snores that sounded like a steam engine was operating in the room. He was quite alert, opening his eyes and sitting up as soon as Klein came out. "Are you going out?" Danitz asked when he saw Gehrman Sparrow take off his hat from the coat rack. "Yes." Klein maintained his persona and didn't explain that he was attempting to act by helping someone confess. "What about me?" "Steel Mavedi and his men are almost all dead, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. Even if the newspaper doesn't publish the news, I can spread it myself. There were idle pirates and adventurers who will use it as a material for bragging, spreading the matter to the sea and would end up informing Captain. That bunch of dogs hit can't do a thing aside from drink and brag, but even so, they still have their uses." Danitz thought for a moment, then he asked while secretly feeling a sense of fear, "Mr. Sparrow, can I leave now?" Klein revealed a faint smile. "You have always been free." "That's right. I wasn't caught by him this time, I was just looking for help. I have always been free." Danitz was stunned for a moment, then he was delighted. But right at that moment, he heard Gehrman Sparrow's voice lightly fleeting towards him. But that ends now. Ah. What? Danitz looked confused. It took him no less than 3 seconds to understand what Gehrman Sparrow meant. He had been captured again. Why? Danitz asked angrily and aggrieved. Klein put on his hat and said in a low voice, I want to meet your captain. Danitz widened his eyes, stood up abruptly, and shouted out, What do you want? This fellow is a little too agitated. Klein replied calmly, I have some things to ask her. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.